When you think about the ability to see the future, most people would get excited at the prospect of winning lottery numbers, making perfect stock investments, or acing every exam. But that's not how it works for our protagonist. Even though he can glimpse the future through his VR headset, he's powerless to escape his fate. No matter how much he plans or tries to avoid it, death always finds a way to catch up. So, the only thing left for him is to fight fate itself. The boy you see in front of us is broken, devastated by the loss of his father. The only thing his father left him is this VR headset, and a mountain of regret and despair to drown in. Yes, you heard that right. Besides this piece of hardware, the boy is left only with sorrow. After his father's funeral, detectives visit the boy, aiming to uncover the reasons behind the suicide. These detectives are blunt, showing little to no sensitivity as they start their questioning right in, asking if his father left any final words or message before he died. Before we go any further into the story, the boy narrates that his father had always been deeply anxious. It all started almost 12 years ago, after his mother died when he was just 5 years old. The boy never learned the cause of his mother's death because his father never shared it with him. But from that point on, his father's behavior shifted drastically. He would often break down in tears, consumed with regret, and would always murmur that if he had only known what was coming, he wouldn't have done what he did. His father became obsessed with small details, like always double-checking whether he'd turned off the gas stove or made sure all the windows were closed. This difference in his behavior was noticeable to everyone, and people often remarked that he seemed to have serious obsessive-compulsive disorder. Growing up with his father's anxieties, the boy himself became timid and mentally fragile. Even a slight threat could make him flinch, and bullies loved to mock how easily he'd cower and flinch, even at the mere stance of someone about to intimidate him. They used to mock him, saying it was because he was the son of a psycho, who was infamous for his weird behaviors in the entire neighborhood. The bullies would laugh, telling him to move away somewhere else because everyone in the neighborhood loved to hate his family. Back at home, we find his father going through his usual cycle of anxiety, biting his nails down to the skin. When our boy came back home and walked in one day, his father immediately started berating him for not carrying an umbrella. But his son reminded him that the sky is clear. His father insisted he needed it because there was a 40% chance of rain in the forecast. Frustrated, the boy finally snapped. He shouted at his father to stop going on about it, reminding him angrily that even the landlady had asked them to leave because she didn't want someone like his father in the neighborhood. His father, lost in his own obsessive thoughts, kept mumbling the same phrases about how he knew this would happen, a refrain the boy had grown tired of hearing. Exasperated, the boy finally asked his father if he even remembered that today was his birthday. The boy made it clear that he couldn't bear the shame any longer. He told his father to look at himself in the mirror and face what he had become. He asked if his father could even summon the courage to live like a human being for just a moment. Finally, in a fit of anger, he said what he shouldn't have, that his father might as well die if he wanted to live like this. Those words struck deep, and his father was visibly shaken. When he looked in the mirror, he seemed afraid of what he saw staring back at him. That conversation was likely the last exchange the boy had with his father. Now, in the present, we find ourselves outside the funeral hall. A detective approaches the boy again, telling him they've discovered his father's will. In it, there's that haunting line once more, which goes like, "If only I had known this would happen." The father further writes about how every year he would ask his son what he wanted for his birthday. He would carefully consider what gift to choose, but this time, he acknowledges that whatever he has picked will be his last gift, and he doesn't even know if his son will like it. The father apologizes for failing to protect his son in the end. He expresses his regret and sorrow, but adds that now, reunited with his beloved wife, he will pray from above for his son's happiness. He prays that his son's future will be bright, that the path ahead will be clear, and that he'll walk only on a path of flowers. Later that day, Sun Woo returns to his building. As he climbs the stairs toward his apartment, the landlady appears, reminding him that if he can't pay the overdue rent, he'll have to vacate the room soon. She makes it clear she doesn't want rumors spreading about a suicide in the building, which might make it difficult to rent out the property. Eventually, Sun Woo reaches his apartment, feeling the sting of her indifference. She didn't even ask if he was doing all right. In that moment, he realizes how alone he truly is, how, in this world, the only person who ever truly cared for him was his father. His gaze falls on the last gift his father left for him. He opens it, and as he expected, it's the VR headset. But seeing the gift only makes Sun Woo's heart ache more. He had wanted his father to be there, to see him use it. As tears stream down his face, he puts on the headset. The moment he does, a hologram of his father appears before his eyes. The guy is absolutely shocked. He quickly rips off the headset off his face as if he's seen a ghost. The hologram tells him to put the device back on, but Sun Woo hesitates, unsure of what's happening. The headset insists, urging him to try again, and after a moment of doubt, he reluctantly puts it back on. And once again, his father's image appears before him. It's nice to see his father looking like a gentleman, because previously, his father looked like a total coomer. The hologram informs Sunwoo that he's currently at level 1, and that the headset has a skill allowing him to see a 1-minute preview of what will happen tomorrow. Naturally, Sunwoo is confused and unsure about what this means. Since there are no other skills to choose from, the headset decides to automatically trigger the preview. Before Sunwoo can protest, his consciousness is pulled into an imaginary world of VR. There, he sees an unknown woman. She reaches into her bag and pulls out an envelope full of money, offering it to him. Sunwoo staggers back as she steps closer, and he can clearly see the green bills slipping out of the envelope. As she moves towards him, the money spills everywhere, scattering across the ground. Then, as quickly as it began, the 1-minute preview ends. Sunwoo is pulled back into reality. The hologram of his father also vanishes since time has run out. The next day arrives and Sunwoo wakes up abruptly. He remembers his dad clearly from the night before, but when he looks around, he wonders if it might have all been a dream. Still, he's sure he saw his father last night. He spots the VR headset and grabs it, trying to turn it on, but it won't start. He thinks maybe it's broken. He then remembers about that preview he saw, but since his father is in debt, there's no way he would have left him any money. Right at that moment, there's a knock on the door. He opens it and finds that same woman from the preview standing in front of him, asking if she can talk to him for a minute. Naturally, Sunwoo lets her in. She soon expresses her condolences over his father's death, saying she's sure it must be tough for him. But as she continues talking, he interrupts her and asks her about her identity. The woman's surprised that he doesn't remember her, but it's understandable since he was so little when they last met. Just like in the preview, she pulls out an envelope full of money and offers it to him. Sunwoo is not sure how to react, but the lady forcefully places the envelope in his hand, along with her business card, telling him to call her if he ever needs help. He looks down at the fat stack of cash in his hands, completely blown away by the massive amount of money. It's so much he can't even process it. The lady then decides it's time to leave since she's always busy with work. Sunwoo tries to stop her as he just can't bring himself to keep all this money without understanding why, but she reassures him, saying she's just paying off the debt she owed to his parents. With that, she walks out, leaving Sunwoo to figure out what to do with all this cash. But of course, just as he starts processing it, that annoying old hag comes banging on his door with little to no manners. He opens it, and she starts going off about how he needs to leave the apartment because she's found new tenants, and she's also complaining about some bad smell coming from his place. Sunwoo just shows her the stack of cash and tells her to shove it in her ass. With that, he's finally alone in his room again, staring at the money once again. He figures if he spends it wisely, he can make it through the next few months. And just as a side note, he didn't actually tell her to shove it. I just wanted to say that because, well, she's seriously annoying. Sunwoo glances at the business card the lady gave him, which turns out to belong to Shin Ye-ji, an investigator from the Seoul Metropolitan Police Department. He starts to wonder if she's actually a cop, because he did not get the chance to ask her this. Turning back to the VR headset, he notices that the box of VR also contains gloves, controllers, and a charger. He quickly plugs it in thinking that it might work back again. The day passes by without much else happening, and before he knows it, it's almost 11 p.m. He's been charging the headset for over 10 hours now, but it's still not working. Frustrated, he picks it up again and plans to take it to the repair shop. But just as he's about to do so, the headset suddenly speaks, telling him to put it back on. Sunwoo is startled to hear this all of a sudden, and headset begins insisting him to wear it. Sunwoo naturally puts the headset on, and his father's hologram reappears. He tries talking to him, but it seems like the hologram is only programmed to respond to specific commands and doesn't say much back. The hologram mentions that Sunwoo has leveled up and now has access to a skill that lets him see a preview of the worst thing that will happen to him tomorrow. Sunwoo has a million questions, but every time he asks, the hologram just fails to register his command. With only this skill active, he's suddenly teleported back into a virtual world. This time, he's in the familiar setting of his school. While he watches two kids argue nearby, a brick comes plummeting from above without Sunwoo noticing. It smacks him on the head, knocking him out instantly. The guys standing over the bridge are the same bullies who messed with our boy all the time, and they're literally sweating their balls to realize that they just killed our boy. After that insane preview of his life, Sunwoo snaps back to reality, and the pain from the brick that fell in the virtual world is still real in the real world, and it hurts like crazy. Everything felt way too real, and now he's even more curious about what this VR device is capable of. The scene transitions to his school, where Sunwoo is seen in one of the staff rooms, talking to his teacher, who's trying to comfort him after the loss of his father. Later, as he leaves the staff room, he notices those same bullies from his preview, arguing just like before. He's stunned to see how everything looks exactly the same, and it sends a chill down his spine. That means the brick from the virtual world must be real too. Panicking, he quickly steps aside and the brick falls just inches away from him, narrowly missing his crotch. He barely manages to avoid what could have been an instant death for him. Unlike in the preview, where the bullies were freaking out after thinking they killed him, they're now just grinning wildly, thrilled to have scared the life out of Sunwoo. They even have the nerve to congratulate him on the death of his trashy psycho father. Seems like Sunwoo is not paying attention to what these loudmouths are saying as he is shocked by the fact that he can see glimpses of the future. He rushes back to his apartment, grinning with excitement at the thought of using this preview skill to his advantage. He presses the power button on the headset as hard as he can, but it still won't turn on, despite having charged it for hours. Glancing at the clock, he remembers that it was around 11 p.m. last night when it activated. Finally, as night falls, the headset powers on, and he logs in. Once again, his father's hologram appears. Sunwoo has tons of questions, but the hologram doesn't respond to most of them. Instead, it simply announces that he has reached level 3. Sunwoo asks if leveling up will eventually let him use better skills, like knowing the lottery numbers, stock prices, or even crypto market trends. But, as usual, the hologram is unable to answer such complex questions that are not already programmed inside it. This time, the level 3 skill offers a 5-minute preview of the worst thing that will happen to him tomorrow. Sunwoo's ears perk up at the mention of 5 minutes, and he quickly tells the hologram to show it to him. As usual, he's transported back into the virtual world. There, he's once again surrounded by those bullies. Fatso, as always, is the first to act, delivering a devastating punch right to Sunwoo's gut. The impact is so intense that it leaves him gasping for air, and before he knows it, he collapses, unable to breathe, ultimately losing his life. He's snapped back into reality, panting heavily from the brutal encounter. The hologram reveals that, in addition to the 5-minute preview, level 3 also grants him the training skill, allowing him to practice what he saw up to 5 times a day. To do so, however, he'll need to wear controllers in each hand. Sunwoo grabs the gloves from the box and the training begins immediately. In his first session, he quickly dodges Fatso's direct punch, which only seems to piss the bully off even more. Fatso clenches his fist and, with a grunt, throws a jaw-crushing punch straight at Sunwoo's face. Sunwoo barely manages to avoid it, but the impact is still brutal as Fatso keeps coming, stomping his feet as he pummels the life out of him. With those final blows, our boy is knocked unconscious in no time. When he snaps back into reality, the hologram calmly informs him that he has 4 training sessions left. Despite the pain he just felt in the virtual world, it doesn't hurt him physically in real life. So, he's eager to practice and improve. He spends the rest of the night training, determined to be ready for whatever comes next. The next day arrives, and Sunwoo sits alone at his desk. The same bullies from his preview walk into the classroom, and they look clearly bored, so they decided to pick on our boy. Fatso grins as he raises his hand to throw the first blow, but Sunwoo startles this sucker with his confidence, and just snickers as he tells the bully to go ahead since he's not scared at all. The bully is momentarily speechless, caught off guard by Sunwoo's unexpected confidence. Fatty's friends are just as confused, unsure of why Sunwoo is acting so cocky and unafraid. They have no idea what's going on, but it's clear they're not used to seeing Sunwoo stand up for himself like this. But Fatty does not hold back. He balls up his fist and swings at Sunwoo with all his might. However, Sunwoo's quick and easily redirects the punch away from him. The friends of Fatty start mocking him, asking him what the hell is he even doing. They joke that they wouldn't even be surprised if Sunwoo ended up beating the crap out of Fatty instead. This only enrages Fatty further. With even more intensity, he charges at Sunwoo, throwing another punch. But Sunwoo already knows what's coming, so he reacts accordingly and effortlessly dodges the blow. And just as our boy predicted, Fatty tries to follow up with a kick. Sunwoo just avoids the kick as well by blocking it head-on in advance. The friends of Fatty snicker as they watch him struggle to land a hit, and the sound of their laughter just pisses Fatty off even more. Frustrated, he glares at Sunwoo and asks him if he wants a full-blown fight. He's ready to throw down. But Sunwoo has already been through this before. He's mentally prepared for what's coming next. Fatty charges forward, launching himself at Sunwoo, but once again, Sunwoo calmly sidesteps. With perfect precision, he uses his leg to trip the bully, sending him tumbling. Fatty goes rolling across the floor, crashing into a nearby desk with a loud thud. Sunwoo stands there, breathing heavily and looking a little timid. But there's a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes as well. He can't believe he actually pulled it off. Fatty, however, is not done. He stands up, looking like a pissed-off bull, and threatens Sunwoo. This is the moment when Sunwoo's confidence starts to waver. He's unsure of what's going to happen next. Just on time, the teacher's arrival ringtone blares through the hall. One of the Fatty's friends, known as Jang Seok, walks over to Fatty, telling him to cut it out because the teacher is on their way. but Fatty is too worked up to listen. Jang Sok gives Fatty a cold glare in response, one so intense it could freeze the sun. He sternly asks if he is trying to show attitude in front of him. By the way, Fatty's name is Sungdin. Sungdin's tough act crumbles instantly. He stammers, stutters, and quickly tries to clear the air, claiming that his frustration was not directed at Jang Sok, but at Sunwoo. Jang Sok then turns to our boy and compliments him on his quick reaction time. He's heard that Sunwoo used to get beat up a lot, but it seems like his reflexes have gotten a lot better. So Jang Sok invites him to face off against this Fatty one-on-one, saying it would be fun and a good chance to teach him a permanent lesson. Sunwoo stammers a bit but agrees to the match tomorrow. Jang Sok is shocked that he actually agreed, but Sunwoo announces loud and clear that he's going to take on this Fatty tomorrow. Sungdin is also looking forward to the fight, ready to tear Sunwoo apart. Just then, the teacher arrives and tells everyone to sit down. As the Fatty walks past Sunwoo, he intentionally bumps into him, gives him a filthy look, and says he's going to kill him. But Sunwoo's not scared of the threat. He's confident he can take him down tomorrow, and we already know how he is going to do that. Once he gets back to the apartment, Sunwoo looks at the clock ticking away. It's almost 11, which means it's time for the headset to activate. As soon as he puts on the helmet, the system powers up. The first thing we see is his father, who congratulates him as usual for leveling up. With the new level, Sunwoo's unlocked a new skill. Now he can see a 5-minute preview of the worst things that could happen tomorrow, along with 5 training sessions to prepare for it. On top of that, the new skill also lets him replay anything that happened today for 10 minutes, and he can watch it up to 5 times. At first, Sunwoo thinks it's a pretty useless skill since he already knows what happened today. But then it clicks to him that he can use it to replay the fight with that Fatty and pinpoint his weaknesses better than anyone else. Our boy quickly tells the system to show him the part where he fought Sungdin, and he wants to watch it at least 5 times. The scene takes us into the virtual world, and now our boy can see the fight from a third-person perspective. Sunwoo carefully watches the fight, noting every move of the Fatty. After spending 5 minutes reviewing, he feels satisfied with this new feature. Next, he decides to check out the worst thing that's going to happen tomorrow, but what he sees is completely unexpected, something he wasn't even thinking about. It's the cocky, annoyed face of Jang Sok, who starts walking toward him aggressively, asking how Sunwoo dares to hit him. Jang Sok then replies to our boy with a brutal punch of his own. The blow is so painful that Sunwoo actually winces in pain, even though it's happening inside the headset. He quickly throws the headset off, completely boggled by the fact that the worst thing he's going to face is getting wrecked by Jang Sok. He just can't believe that he is going to hit Jang Sok, especially since he's supposed to be the best fighter in his grade. Sunwoo puts the helmet back on and equips himself with gloves in order to start the practice session. He spends some time training, but by now he looks utterly exhausted and completely wiped out. He's convinced that no matter how much he trains, it's all useless. He's sure he's going to die in 2 minutes tomorrow. The next day arrives, and Sunwoo decides to just stay home and rest. He informs the school about his absence, feeling relieved that now, without going to school, there's nothing to worry about since he won't have to fight in the first place. He'd spent all night worrying about nothing, and now he's completely drained, so he decides to get a bit more sleep. As the clock ticks away, it hits 5 p.m. and he wakes up to a loud banging on the door. He hears a familiar voice calling out, telling him to get up because skipping school won't keep him safe. It's of course Sungdin and his companions, and they're here to mock Sunwoo for chickening out and taking a leave just to avoid the fight. Sunwoo thinks of calling the police for a moment, but then he realizes his phone's battery is dead. Meanwhile, those guys outside keep calling him out as he scrambles to find his charger. Then Jang Sok threatens that if he doesn't come out, they're going to break in and steal everything he owns. Since Sunwoo does not want to risk losing his headset, he decides to confront them. He steps out and tells them to choose a place for the fight and he'll be ready. They head to an abandoned building where Sunwoo stands face to face with Sungdin. The Fatty is feeling cocky and smug, but Sunwoo's got sass for days. He snaps back, telling this loudmouth to stop yapping and just come at him. The Fatty balls up his fist, but before he can deliver his punch, Sunwoo lands a quick punch of his own. Sungdin's sidekicks are annoyed to see their leader getting wrecked. Fueled by anger, Sungdin charges at him impulsively, but once again, he gets a punch straight to the face, and Sunwoo keeps pummeling him. The guys on the sidelines are stunned, having no clue how Sungdin's taking such a beating. Finally, with one last kick, Sunwoo sends Sungdin flying. For the finishing touch, he starts stomping the piece of trash for messing with him. Jang Sok begins walking toward him, telling him to stop, but Sunwoo tells him they better not bully him anymore. Jang Sok, on the other hand, is dying of curiosity. If Sunwoo knows how to fight like this, why didn't he show it before? Why had he been running around with his eyes closed like a coward? Jang Sok then answers his own question, thinking it must be because Sunwoo had a sick dad, and maybe he's always been powerful. Jangsuk crosses the line when he says there's no reason for Sunwoo to have this much power unless it's because his father died recently. He even asks what Sunwoo's father looked like hanging from the ceiling and wonders if that's what triggered the powers inside him. With that, Sunwoo delivers a brutal punch to this insensitive bastard, who clearly has no regard for other people's feelings. But this moment also triggers Sunwoo to relive what he saw in the VR headset. Even after taking a day off school, it seems he couldn't escape his fate. Sunwoo can do nothing but tremble and sweat, eventually taking a hit from Jangsuk. He drops to the ground while Jangsuk, gritting his teeth in frustration, sneers and tells him he's as good as dead, hoping he meets his dead father in the afterlife. Sunwoo grapples with the reality that no matter what he does, he only has 2 minutes left. He decides to do something unexpected, something he didn't try in the VR preview. He scoops up a handful of dirt and throws it right into Jangsuk's eyes, then bolts as fast as he can. One of the other guys in the group, whose name we don't know yet, starts chasing after him. Sunwoo runs with all his might, but it feels like he can't outrun the bastard chasing him. He's already drained from fighting the fatty and feels like he's used up most of his energy. Eventually, he jumps onto the highway, barely avoiding getting run over by a car. The car owner starts yelling at him for jumping in front of the car, but Sunwoo quickly tells him to save him. This is how Sunwoo finally manages to get off the road with his life saved. But it still isn't enough. He might have escaped today, but that bastard will find him tomorrow. Just the thought of it drives Sunwoo crazy. He can't even report it to the police because he just beat up Sungdin and, on top of that, he hit Jangsuk first, which caused the fight in the first place. Then, a scary thought crosses Sunwoo's mind that those bastards must be waiting in front of his apartment right now. He's absolutely sure he's dead for real because there's no one around to help. But just at that moment, he remembers the business card that Lady Shin Yeji had given him. Later that night, he visits her and explains everything in detail. She listens carefully but points out that solving a case without evidence is going to be tough. Still, she promises to contact the local police and let's see what they can do. She assures him that she'll arrange for officers to patrol near his house to make sure they aren't hanging around. Grateful, he thanks her, and then she asks if there's anything else he wants to add. That's when he hesitates and asks how she knew his father. The question catches her off guard, and for a moment, she's unsure where to start. Eventually, she explains that his father used to live next door when they were in high school. But what's more surprising is that she actually knew our boy's mother, because his mom was a cop too. This revelation shocks Sunwoo. He had no idea his mother was a police officer. When Yeji asks if he didn't know, he admits that his father would always get angry whenever he tried asking about her. Still, Sunwoo finds it weird how much help she's offering for someone who just used to live next door. That's when Lady Shin Yeji explains that his mother actually saved her life. She reveals that when she was in high school, she was almost raped. But Sunwoo's mother was the one who stepped in and stopped the attack. However, the rapist's family was incredibly wealthy, and he managed to get off scot-free after hiring a fancy law firm. Yeji was furious, so much so that she even tried to take her own life. But it was Sunwoo's mother who saved her again, and his father helped as well. They came to visit her during that time, took care of her, and his father gave her words that stuck with her. Never give up on life. There's hope in life. It's funny hearing those words from someone who literally ended his own life. That's why I hate motivational speakers. They feed people a bunch of nonsense about overcoming poverty, all while charging a copious amount of money to deliver that message. She also finds it strange that he gave up on life. After they moved away, she barely saw him, so she has no idea what he's been through. That's when Sunwoo opens up and tells her that ever since his mother died, he changed a lot. She reminds him that he should see all the help she's given him as repayment for the kindness his parents showed her. Confused, he asks what she means by that, and she repeats his father's words. Never give up just because it's hard. When you live, you see hope. Essentially, she's saying that she's paying him back by living out those words he's heard his whole life. Later, Sunwoo heads home, still reeling from the revelation that his mother was a cop. He grabs his headset, and when the hologram appears, it shows that he's still stuck at level 4, just like he was yesterday. The message says that in order to level up, he needs to stop running from his fate and fight it. Of course, this doesn't make sense to him. That bastard is too powerful to fight, but the system just repeats the same cryptic message, telling him to not avoid your fate, fight it. Eventually, Sunwoo decides to follow what the system is telling him. So, he commands the headset to show him the worst thing that is going to happen tomorrow. In an instant, he spawns in the alley behind the school. But as soon as he opens his eyes, they're filled with sand, and he can't see anything in front of him. It seems like those assholes are getting back at him by shoving sand into his eyes. The pain is real. The sand makes his eyes water, and he instinctively starts rubbing them to try and ease the discomfort. But Sunwoo refuses to give up. He pushes through the pain and decides to start his first training session. As the dirt covers his face, he endures it like a true Sigma. After what feels like an eternity, Sunwoo is completely exhausted. He collapses to the ground, realizing that no matter what he does, two guys are always holding his arms, keeping him pinned, while Jang-suk throws dirt into his eyes. His eyes are red and raw from the pain. It's becoming too much to bear, and he's not sure how much longer he can endure this. The next day arrives. We see these bullies dragging him into the alley behind the school before taking their revenge. The fatty looks irritated, realizing that Sunwoo is a lot tougher than he initially thought. Now, he's even more eager to get back at him. Jang-suk grabs a handful of dirt and quickly throws it toward Sunwoo's face. But this time, Sunwoo reacts fast and shields himself, dodging the attack. Seeing him fight back only makes Jang-suk angrier. He orders his buddies to hold Sunwoo in place. Grabbing another pile of sand, Jang-suk yanks Sunwoo by the hair and tells him to open his eyes. But Sunwoo is done running from his fate. With gritted teeth and unwavering resolve, he opens his eyes, ready to face whatever comes next. As the handful of sand comes his way, Sunwoo summons all his strength, and with one push, he frees his arm from the guy holding it and shields his face just in time. The shithead who was holding him is left completely dumbfounded. Even though he had a tight grip on Sunwoo's arm, our boy somehow managed to break free. Even Sunwoo can't understand how this happened. He did not have this much strength last night, but it looks like he surely has gotten stronger. Meanwhile, Jang-suk is seething with frustration. He can't believe that these useless guys can't even hold this weakling down properly. In a fit of rage, he raises his hand and slaps Sunwoo across the face. He doesn't stop there, and delivers slap after slap. But it's high time Sunwoo reacted. Summoning what little strength he has left, he throws a powerful punch right into Jang-suk's chest. The blow is so forceful it makes Jang-suk's spit escape his mouth, completely caught off guard. The fatty and the other guy stand there wide-eyed, shocked by Sunwoo's unexpected retaliation. Jang-suk, however, is losing his patience fast. After 2 minutes, Sunwoo finally collapses to the ground after taking a lot of crap. Jang-suk, on the other hand, does not seem to be really satisfied and tells our boy to stand up and fight, but Sunwoo doesn't respond. So in response, Jang-suk swings his leg hard, aiming a kick at Sunwoo. But before it can land, a man with his loud voice from the nearby apartments shouts at them to stop causing a scene. One of Jang-suk's friends, whom I don't know, tells him to let go before this man calls the police. Since we don't know this third guy's name, let's call him Third Wheel. Jang-suk huffs in frustration but relents. He and his buddies begin to walk off, leaving Sunwoo sprawled on the ground, barely holding on. Sunwoo is still conscious, though barely. He feels a strange sense of satisfaction that he survived, but he has no idea how. When he gets back home, he looks at his battered body. The hospital told him nothing was broken, so he should recover soon enough. As soon as he lies down, the headset calls out to him, urging him to put it on. He glances at it, but then shuts his eyes again. He doesn't have the energy to even sit up, let alone use the device. But the headset keeps nagging him, and he explodes in frustration. Eventually, he gives up and puts the headset on. The first thing that he gets is a piece of good news that he's leveled up to level 5. This unlocks a 10-minute preview of the worst thing that will happen to him tomorrow, along with 10 training sessions. He also gains access to 10 one-hour replays of the past. The sheer number of previews and replays seems massive, but the math doesn't quite add up. If he uses all 10 one-hour replays, the 10-minute previews, and the 10 training sessions, that's almost 12 hours of headset usage, meaning he'd be stuck using the device until 11 a.m. the next morning, an absurdly long stretch. That's when the hologram explains to him that while he's in the preview, time is actually frozen. It seems Sunwoo wasn't aware of this until now. Now that he thinks about it, he remembers that when he was at level 4, he was supposed to experience 1 hour passing in reality whenever he used his skill. However, the time always stayed frozen at 11 p.m., something he only just realized. With this mystery cleared up, he decides to use his 10 one-hour replays. His plan is to replay the part where he was sleeping, and he intends to do it 10 times. Looks like Sunwoo isn't as clueless as he seems after all. So, he repeats the same hour of sleep 10 times. After using up all 10 of those 1 hour replays, he looks at his body, and to his surprise, the bruises are almost healed, and he feels significantly better. It's as if the repeated rest has accelerated his recovery. Sunwoo grabs his gloves and puts the headset back on, ready to use his 10 training sessions. He's confident he can do it this time and quickly takes his stance, preparing to face those bullies. But to his surprise, instead of finding himself in the alley with them, he's suddenly back in the classroom. Sungdin is there, completely freaking out as he sees Sunwoo throw a punch at Jang-suk. As soon as Sunwoo hears this, he is left clueless. He pulls the headset off his head as he freaks out. He can't believe what he just experienced. He starts to doubt himself, thinking that he was lucky just to be alive today. There's no way he has the courage to face Jang-suk again. But then something unpleasant hits his mind. He remembers the words he once said to his father. He clearly recalls telling his dad to just die if he was going to keep living the way he did. Those words echo in Sunwoo's mind, and a flood of guilt and sorrow overtakes him. He can't hold back the tears as he realizes the weight of what he said. He told his father to die, and now his father's gone because of it. At that moment, something snaps in Sunwoo. He knows he can't live like a coward, not anymore. He won't let his father's death be for nothing. As soon as Sunwoo puts the headset on, the scene transitions to the next day. It's almost 9 a.m., and the trio is hanging out together in the classroom. The third wheel is sure that Sunwoo won't come to school today, and Sungdin agrees, both of them assuming he's probably too scared after everything that's happened. Even then, Sungdin points out that Sunwoo's been acting strangely lately. He reminds the others how just a few days ago, Sunwoo would freak out whenever they even touched him. The third wheel agrees and rubs some salt into Fatty's wounds, bringing up how Sunwoo beat him up twice now. Fatty gets visibly annoyed at the insult and snaps back in order to defend himself. He claims that if he fights that bastard ever again, he is going to crush him hard. It looks like it's the bullies who are about to get screwed, because Sunwoo suddenly leaps at them like a Hollywood action hero, delivering a powerful kick straight to Jangsok's face. In that moment, we see the terrified face of Fatty from the preview, and the entire student body in the classroom becomes witnesses to Sunwoo's bold move. Jangsok quickly stands up to save his last remaining dignity. He takes his shirt off, making it clear he's not about to show any mercy, but Sunwoo doesn't back down. He exudes an unwavering strength and resolve, making it obvious that he's prepared to fight to the death if he has to. Jangsok balls up his fist and swings it at Sunwoo, but Sunwoo ducks back just in time, narrowly avoiding the punch. He continues dodging, moving with precision, and this only makes Jangsok angrier. Sunwoo challenges him to keep trying, provocatively telling him to land a hit. After all, he spent 5 training sessions last night just practicing dodging moves like these. But he knows dodging won't be enough. He can't just rely on evasion forever, and he can't throw a simple punch at Jangsok either. The weight difference is just too great. Sunwoo intentionally takes a punch to the face from Jangsok, and after that punch, he quickly starts bolting out of the place as fast as he can for the stairs. Jangsok also gives chase after our boy to his heart's content. Sunwoo ascends the stairs, and they eventually reach the 5th floor. Jangsok gets cocky as he reminds our boy that the rooftop is locked, so there is nowhere to run for him. Well, he is talking as if Sunwoo didn't know that already. Sunwoo spins around in a flash and lands a solid kick to Jangsok's face, using the height advantage to its fullest. The humiliating kick only serves to frustrate Jangsok more. He immediately swings a punch at Sunwoo, but once again, he's met with a well-timed kick to the face. This time, Jangsok loses his balance and tumbles down the stairs, crashing to the ground. Sungdin and the third wheel arrive just in time to see their friend sprawled out on the floor. Meanwhile, Sunwoo stands tall at the top of the staircase, his stance solid and unwavering. He had anticipated this moment. He'd figured out the stairwell strategy the night before. Since he's now standing on the top floor, there's no danger of anyone coming from the rooftop. And if Jangsok tries to climb the stairs again, Sunwoo can simply kick him back down. It doesn't take long for the two bullies to realize what Sunwoo is up to. They try to shame him for using cheap tactics, but Sunwoo isn't fazed. He calmly makes it clear that he's fighting for his life, so there's nothing shameful about it. Jangsok's eyes narrow, and a sneaky, dirty idea forms in his mind. In an instant, he snaps the broomstick under his feet and holds the stick, with the sharp end pointed directly at Sunwoo. But as expected, Sunwoo doesn't even flinch. He had anticipated this. As soon as Jangsok charges at him, Sunwoo grabs the stick with ease and uses all his strength to push it backward. Jangsok loses his balance and starts falling. To add insult to injury, Sunwoo follows up with a brutal kick to Jangsok's face. The other two goons cower in fear, realizing they're in way over their heads. Sunwoo lands right on top of Jangsok and begins throwing punch after punch. The crowd starts to gather, watching in disbelief as Sunwoo pummels Jangsok. It's clear to everyone that my guy is completely dominating the fight. Jangsok finally grabs both of Sunwoo's fists and shoves him aside. Although Sunwoo managed to overpower Jangsok for a moment, he knows he's still far from defeating him completely. Despite all the training sessions he's gone through, he hasn't found a way to fully bring down his opponent. He acknowledges the bitter truth that his offense is too weak, and his stamina is running out. Jangsok stands tall once again, clearly realizing it was all part of Sunwoo's plan. He throws a devastating punch to Sunwoo's face, sending him crashing backwards. The punch is enough to make Sunwoo's nose bleed, but it's worth it, because now he has the stick his opponent wanted to use against him. But contrary to what everyone expected, our boy doesn't use the stick to defend himself. Instead, he smashes the school window and, to everyone's shock, climbs through it to jump out. He makes it clear that even if Jangsok gets too close, he's going to fall from the highest point, ready to die. Jangsok starts laughing, thinking this is just a show, but it looks like Sunwoo isn't messing around. He's actually prepared to jump. Jangsok still thinks it's a bluff, so he tries to grab Sunwoo, but as soon as his fingers graze our boy's feet, my guy intentionally releases his grip and starts to fall. Jangsok hurriedly grabs him by the legs, calling him stupid for this reckless stunt. Everyone scrambles to help, and they eventually pull Sunwoo back. Jangsok, on the other hand, looks absolutely terrified by the thought that he was just about to become a murderer. He asks our boy if all of this is happening just because he trash-talked his father. Sunwoo doesn't answer directly. Instead, he says he's not sure if there's any worse feeling than pushing his own father to death. The pain was so overwhelming that he wanted to die with his father, but he didn't have the courage to do so. So, he grabs the sharp glass shard and starts walking toward Jangsok, telling him to fulfill his wish. He asks Jangsok to take the shard and stab him with it. Sunwoo grips the glass so tightly that the sharp glass digs into his skin, drawing blood. Jangsok recoils in fear, while Sunwoo looks like an absolute psychopath, staring him down with cold determination, and makes it abundantly clear Jangsok can't kill him, then our boy is going to kill Jangsok instead. Seems like Sunwoo isn't messing around, because he swings that sharp piece of glass at Jangsok. But the guy quickly counters with a punch that knocks our little psychopath down. However, he still remains unhinged, and tells Jangsok that he can't kill him with just fists alone, and suggests he use the glass instead. At this point, shit has totally gone out of control, and Jangsok's had enough of this maniac. He bolts in the opposite direction, and his friends follow suit. Sunwoo throws the piece of glass away and reflects on how his willingness to die has, paradoxically, kept him alive. An hour later, we find the trio in a back alley, and without a doubt, they seem to be debating about our boy. Sungdin asks the third wheel if Sunwoo or anyone else reported the incident to the teacher. The third wheel explains that Sunwoo said he acted out because of the stress from his father's death, and even hurt himself by breaking the window. Since he's in a complicated situation, the teachers decided to let it slide this time. Sungdin wonders if Sunwoo's just too scared of Jangsok, or if he's genuinely going nuts. Jangsok annoyingly shuts both of them out, and reminds them that they must have missed when Sunwoo literally turned around and tried to kill him. He's pretty sure that Psycho was not afraid of the consequences of his actions at all. His friends suggest they just move on and leave Sunwoo alone, but this only fires Jangsok up more. Everyone in the school saw him get humiliated by that brat, and he's not about to let that slide. They ask him what the next move is, suggesting maybe catching Sunwoo and beating him up might be enough to settle things. Jangsok, however, isn't so sure. After all, they're talking about a psycho who literally tried to kill him. But then, a great idea sparks in his mind. He decides instead of just taking a beating, he'll make sure Sunwoo ends up behind bars. We're back at Sunwoo's place, and it's almost time for him to use his VR headset. After tending to his injured hand, he wears his headset, and the first thing he notices is that he hasn't leveled up, even after the crazy day he just had. He then decides to see what is going to happen tomorrow, and he is shocked to see that he's going to get arrested. The next day after school, Sungdin invites Sunwoo to hang out. He and his friends want to apologize for how badly Sunwoo got hurt yesterday. Fatty asks if he is willing to come. He even throws this suspiciously forced smile to make it seem more convincing. To his surprise, Sunwoo agrees right away. They finally arrive at Dungho's apartment, where his parents aren't home, so they can have a blast. Once inside, we meet the third wheel and Jang-seok, who greet Sunwoo warmly and tell him to make himself at home. It turns out there's someone else there too. The guy in glasses is Song Kyung-min, and Sunwoo isn't entirely sure what he's doing here, or at least he pretends not to know. Dungho tries to keep it casual, saying they're just here to have some fun, and that Song Kyung-min is going to be their new friend too. Right away, he lures Sunwoo into his room, telling him to let's play some games on the computer. Once they leave the drawing area, Dang-seok decides it's time to put their plan into action. But before making his move, he shoots a sharp, almost threatening glance at Song Kyung-min, and tells him that if he can make it through today, no one is going to ever touch him again. While the fatty tries to distract our guy inside the room, Dang-seok starts beating the crap out of Song Kyung-min. Sunwoo quickly rushes out to hear the commotion. He steps forwards to stop this bastard, but the fatty and the third wheeler quickly step in the way. So our guy punches the fatty first with a solid hit to the face, then lands a second punch on the third wheel. Meanwhile, Jang-seok grabs a pair of scissors from the table, but before he can use them on Song Kyung-min, our guy snatches them out of his hands. Jang-seok decides to act like a suicidal maniac this time. He just pulls his shirt up and tells our guy to kill him if he wants. Right at that moment, there's a knock on the door. Song Kyung-min rushes to open the door as if he was already expecting the knock. When he opens it, the pizza delivery guy is standing there. The guy gets concerned when he sees the bruised-up student and asks who treated him like this. Song Kyung-min immediately points to our guy, saying the person with the scissors was the one who did it. And just like that, our guy finds himself in the police station along with the others. The three of the bullies try to convince the officer that Sunwoo is the criminal who did this, but the officer finds it ridiculous that these three couldn't stop just one guy. But then the fatty quickly chimes in, saying they were powerless because he was holding scissors. He convinces the officer that he can ask the other kids at school about Sunwoo's violence, mentioning how he broke a window and even threatened Jang-seok with a piece of glass. Lady Shin Ye-ji arrives and is shocked to see Sunwoo in trouble. She immediately addresses the officer at the table and introduces herself as Shin Ye-ji from the Seoul Metropolitan Police Department. The officer recognizes her and fills her in on the situation. He mentions that the pizza delivery guy is giving his testimony, and according to him, it was Sunwoo who did it. They're also taking separate statements from the victim, Song Kyung-min. Shin Ye-ji then turns to our guy and asks him if it's all true, to which he reminds her that no one believes the guy who hits others, so she should probably ask the one who got hit. Of course, this isn't what she was expecting to hear from him. That's when Sunwoo calls out to Jang-seok, and with a smile as cool as a cucumber, he asks this piece of shit if he is ready for some sweet jail time. In order to understand how these fools got played by our guy, let's rewind a bit to the night before, around 11 o'clock. Sunwoo is shocked to find out he's being charged with beating Song Kyung-min and even attempting to kill him with a pair of scissors. He's absolutely rattled by this. After all, why would he beat up Song Kyung-min for no reason? But the 10-minute preview only showed him this much, and he has no idea how any of this even happened. Not to mention, there's no point in using his training to try and escape the police station. What he can do to escape the situation is prove his innocence. To do that, he needs to gather some evidence. And right in the present moment, it looks like our guy has exactly what he needs to send this cocky sucker to jail. Right at that moment, another officer walks in and asks who's Jang-seok. Naturally, Jang-seok is confused as to why he's being called. When he turns to face the officer pulls out a pen and says that they have got this pen from the victim. It's basically a voice recorder, and it has a recording of everything that happened during the incident. As soon as the officer presses the button, the voice recording starts playing. Jang-seok loses all the color from his face when he hears himself threatening Song Kyung-min. There's also a part of the recording where the other two idiots, who were in on the plan, are literally shaking in their boots as they hear it. Of course, Jang-seok is completely shocked and jumps up from his seat, claiming that this isn't right. But the officer is absolutely livid, and what he's heard on the recording is more than enough for him to make his final judgment. With that, Jang-seok's fate is sealed. He's fucked royally. Later, we see Song Kyung-min apologizing to our guy, but he reassures him that there's nothing to apologize for since everything worked out great. However, Song Kyung-min is confused about why he gave him that tape recorder this morning and how he knew this would happen. To that, Sunwoo hides the truth and comes up with a convincing response that those guys are assholes to their core, and he was sure that they might bully Song Kyung-min as well. With that, Song Kyung-min decides to part ways as his mother has arrived. Lady Shin Ye-ji then comes over to our guy with some good news that Jang-seok will be transferred to another school because he has a record of assault. But what he tried today was too deceptive. If it hadn't been for the recording, all the blame would have been on Sunwoo's shoulders. She asks him where he got that pen, and he explains that his father had it, along with a bunch of other random stuff like mini recorders and dash cams. As weird as it all sounds, Shin Ye-ji is glad it saved his life today. She then suggests grabbing some food together. Later, as they settle into a nearby restaurant, they share a meal. The lady mentions that she heard he likes pork chops. Sunwoo asks if his father told her, to which she nods, adding that every time his father talked, he would bring up his son almost every minute. She shares that when she sent him an email saying she'd landed a job as an officer, Sunwoo's father was as happy as if he were her own dad. Hearing this makes Sunwoo glad, and he comments that her own father would have been even happier. But the lady casually drops a bomb that she doesn't have a dad. This leaves Sunwoo startled. She reveals that her parents divorced when she was young, and later, her mother remarried and ran away. She was raised by her grandmother. Sunwoo feels sad hearing this, but the lady quickly reassures him that he doesn't have to feel sorry about anything. She then puts more food in his bowl and says that since she didn't have much of a family, his parents helped her a lot. She adds that she wants to continue being like family with him too. With a warm smile, she tells him to just call her Yeji Nuna. This leaves our boy blushing, surprised to see her getting so casual with him. Later, when Sunwoo gets home, he receives a phone call from her. He assures her that he's made it home safely. He feels happy about how nice she is, which makes him wonder why his father didn't mention much about her earlier. Since it's already 11 p.m., his headset requests him to put it on. He lights up his room, dons the headset, and decides to check the worst thing that could happen tomorrow. In the virtual world, he finds himself in the classroom during break time. There, he meets a new student who greets him politely and tries to get acquainted, mentioning he's a newly transferred student. But Sunwoo knows this isn't how the worst preview is supposed to go, so he flatly tells the newcomer to hit him already. Of course, the newcomer has no idea why Sunwoo is saying this and asks, confused, why he would do such a thing. Sunwoo gets frustrated and lashes out, scaring the poor guy to his core. The new student nervously reminds him that he literally just transferred to this school today and suggests it would be better if they got along instead of talking about hitting each other. Sunwoo takes off the headset after the preview, completely confused about how talking to a new guy could be the worst thing that could happen to him. He quickly puts the headset back on and decides to hit the guy first. As soon as he's in the training session, he starts pummeling the poor guy. But instead of fighting back, the new guy just apologizes. Sunwoo snaps back to reality, still clueless. If getting into a fight wasn't the worst thing, then what the heck could be waiting for him tomorrow? He then gets an idea and decides to act normal during the next practice session to see what happens. When the new guy approaches him again, Sunwoo doesn't bother responding to any greetings. Instead, he grabs his phone and starts checking stock prices and the value of cryptocurrencies. After memorizing the numbers, he gets back to reality and notes down all the digital coins and their values. Next, he checks how much money he has left. With 415,000 won, he realizes he could easily make 200,000 won with a 50% return. Just the thought of making money like this leaves him absolutely crazy with excitement. It's 9 a.m. the next day, and our boy is totally sleep-deprived. It looks like his plan to make some quick cash has tanked, because he doesn't even have an adult guardian to help him open an account. Without that, he can't buy stocks or coins. Heck, he can't even check the lottery numbers because for that, he'd need to watch Saturday Night Live after 9 p.m. But right now, the preview skill only shows him 10 minutes of the worst things that'll happen tomorrow, and he can't even specify the time of day he wants to see. Frustrated, he throws his phone hard on the floor. He's completely annoyed that he can't use his ability to become a billionaire just because he's a minor. If only he had parents. And the mention of parents reminds him of Nuna, his new family member. He quickly dials her number, hoping she can help. She picks up, and as soon as she hears his disoriented voice, she asks if he even slept. But he doesn't bother explaining, and quickly tells her to write down the names of some stocks and coins he's about to tell her. But the lady turns him down immediately, saying she doesn't buy stocks or coins or anything like that. When she was a kid, her father lost all their money in stocks, and that's actually what led to her parents getting divorced. Her father was so addicted that he even took her piggy bank just to gamble with the last bit of money. But Sunwoo desperately tries to tell her that this is real, and she won't regret it. She makes it clear that gambling is the worst addiction to have, and everyone thinks they can get guaranteed money. But Sunwoo, still desperate, keeps pleading, swearing that it's 100% correct because he has all the tricks to know what's coming in advance. This last line catches her off guard, and she quickly asks him, why is he talking like his mother? She tells him that his mother, Ji Hyun, who passed away, said the same thing to her when she saved her. In the back of our boy's mind, he begins to think his mother might also have used this headset. She assures him that if he needs pocket money, she can give him some. But for now, she's busy, and they'll talk later. With that, she hangs up, and Sunwoo is left staring at his phone, thinking about what just Nuna said about his mother. In school, Dongho asks the third wheel about Jangsok, and the third wheel explains that he's talking to a lawyer because there's a chance he might actually go to prison. Dongho grits his teeth in frustration, thinking about how Sunwoo really turned the tables on them. The third wheel then mentions that he might move out as well. This shocks the fatty, and he quickly asks why he's moving. The third wheel explains that rumors have spread about him being at the police station, and his mother says she can't live with the embarrassment in the neighborhood. The fatty gasps in shock, realizing that if both of his friends move out, he'll be left alone at this school. At that moment, our guy pops up on the classroom entrance and tells these two to move out of the way so he can enter. Neither of the thugs budges, so our boy gives them a deadly glare. That intense gaze is enough to make them back off and respectfully leave the way clear for Sunwoo. It seems like our guy is annoyed to see that all the stocks he checked yesterday have finally gone up, and he's unable to reap any benefit out of it. The fact that he was just one step away from making a ton of money is driving him crazy. He's so frustrated that he bangs his study table hard enough to make his phone bounce off it. The two thugs are literally trembling in fear, not understanding why he's acting like this. Right at that moment, the teacher walks in, followed closely by the new transfer student we saw in the preview. His name is Gongxian, but from now on, we'll call him Xian. The teacher tells Xian to take his seat, and the only seat available is right next to our boy. So, like any normal person, Xian walks over to Sunwoo and greets him politely, since they're fellow classmates. But our guy doesn't bother to pay much attention, and just keeps scrolling through his phone. Xian perks up when he sees Sunwoo scrolling through stocks and claims that he does the same. Out of curiosity, Sunwoo asks if his parents set up an account for him, to which Xian replies positively. This leaves Sunwoo a bit shocked, and he quickly takes his chance to shake hands in order to become buddies forever. After school, the two of them walk together, and Xian is amazed to learn how Sunwoo managed to send a bully like Jangsok to jail. Sunwoo doesn't seem too eager to open up to this guy, as he wants to learn more about him first. After all, the preview showed that meeting this guy was the worst thing that would happen today. Cian then tells him to just call him by his second name. Sunwoo acknowledges it and further follows up with a question about what his parents do. Cian responds that they're out of the country, so he lives alone with his butler. The mention of a butler scares Sunwoo because if Cian has a butler, that must mean he's ultra rich. Later, they arrive at the gaming center, where Cian wants to play a game on a machine in front of them. Sunwoo explains how the machine works, and once Cian understands it a bit, he starts rummaging through his bag to pull out the money for the game. Then, he pulls out this massive stack of Korean bills, which completely shocks our boy. The amount of money he's holding is way more than needed since they only need a few thousand won to play. Cian quickly clarifies that he's still not used to Korean money yet. Sunwoo finds it ridiculous how Cian is a rich guy with zero concept of money. He wonders if that's why he was portrayed as bad in the preview. He starts to worry that if he keeps hanging out with Cian, he might eventually get himself killed. And just as he's thinking about that, some trouble comes their way in the form of bullies who want to talk to Cian for some reason. The leader of the thugs points out that they saw Cian earlier at the diner. These filthy, greedy guys followed him because of the money in his bag, and now they want some of it. It finally clicks to our boy that this must be the bad thing that could have happened to him today. Cian, on the other hand, decides to just hand them some money, but Sunwoo quickly grabs his hand and reminds him not to be an idiot. No matter how much money he has, he shouldn't be giving it to people like these thugs. Those cocky seniors get annoyed seeing this brat getting in their way. Some of them recognize Sunwoo right away, and they remember he's the one who fought Jangsok in first grade. Just because of him, Jangsok is now under investigation by the police. One of the thugs makes a snide comment about how Sunwoo has turned into a cocky jerk ever since his father passed away. That hits a nerve, and Sunwoo snaps back, warning the guy to watch his mouth. The leader of the thugs suddenly steps in and throws a devastating punch right at Sunwoo's face, sending him sprawling backward. This guy means business, and he makes it clear that Sunwoo can call the police, break a window, or do whatever he wants. No one's going to be scared of him. He raises his leg, ready to stomp on Sunwoo to make his point even clearer, since they're out on the street where no one is likely to intervene. At that moment, Cian pulls out his purse full of cash and calmly tells the thug to just take it. The bastards snatch the money and start walking away from the scene. But Sunwoo is not about to let these guys go that easily. He calls out telling them to stop right there. The cocky thugs turn back, visibly annoyed. Sunwoo challenges them head-on to fight, but he ends up getting screwed himself. This guy in a yellow-black jacket beats the hell out of him, kicking him over and over without any hesitation or stopping. Then, out of nowhere, a guy in a black suit shows up and tells the thugs to scram. The thugs give the suited guy some creepy looks and even try to threaten him, warning him not to tell anyone about what just happened. The white shirt thug even tries to lay a filthy hand on this gentleman, but the suited guy, who's clearly a beast in disguise, grabs his wrist and gives it a bone-crushing twist, telling the bastard to get lost. Later that night, we find ourselves back at Sunwoo's apartment. Sunwoo wakes up and sees Cian sitting next to him. He asks his new friend what happened, to which Cian explains that some man passing by rescued them. Cian reminds him that they wanted to take him to the hospital since he had a concussion, but Sunwoo refused. So Cian brought him back to his place, and he had been sleeping ever since. Sunwoo notices that his headset is almost ready to wear, so he assures Cian that he's fine and tries to push him out of his apartment. Once he's finally alone, the headset prompts him to wear it. As soon as he puts it on, the hologram congratulates him for reaching level 6. Now, he can watch a 15-minute preview of the worst thing that's going to happen tomorrow, and he can also train 15 times. Additionally, he has the option to review today's events 10 times over for 2 hours. Cian decides to start with the review because he wants to know what happened when he was unconscious. But the hologram delivers some bad news that he can't review something he doesn't remember. With that in mind, our boy decides to preview the worst thing that's going to happen tomorrow. He finds himself on the street, and out of nowhere, a guy with a knife stabs him. Sunwoo turns his head and sees a hoodie-wearing guy who immediately runs off after stabbing him in the back. Once Sunwoo snaps back to reality, he's absolutely terrified, rubbing his back where he feels the lingering pain from the stab. He quickly puts the headset back on and decides to open his training time. The next day, Sunwoo sits quietly at his desk, thinking about how tonight, at 9 p.m., he's going to get stabbed in the alleyway near his house. Even though he managed to block the knife, the guy ran much faster than him, and despite 15 rounds of training, Sunwoo couldn't catch up. He's desperate to figure out who that person might be. Just as he's sitting there, lost in thought, his friend Cian suddenly pulls up in front of him. Cian shows him the VR headset with the same model that Sunwoo had on at his house yesterday. Seeing this rattles Sunwoo to his core, and he yells out loud, asking if Cian secretly touched his stuff at his house yesterday. His loud voice grabs the attention of the entire class, and he feels a bit embarrassed as all eyes turn to him. He lowers his voice and asks his friend again if he touched his stuff. Cian quickly assures him with a no, explaining that he would never touch someone else's things without permission. Cian reminds his friend that if they play online, they can play together, but Sunwoo quickly says he can't play since his VR is broken. Cian offers to buy him a brand new one, but that doesn't sit well with Sunwoo. It feels as if Cian is looking down on him, and the idea of accepting such a gift makes him uncomfortable. Cian, on the other hand, just wants to become friends. But Sunwoo keeps reminding this rich guy that he lives alone in a rooftop room on a monthly rent, without his parents, so he's not in the same league as someone like Cian. He further tells him that they're no match for each other, and Cian should just stick to hanging out with people who are on his level. Cian counters by asking what he needs to do to fit in. Sunwoo asks him if he doesn't have any friends, and Cian sadly admits he hasn't had any real friends since he was a kid. All he's had around him are people who just want to use him. But when he saw Sunwoo, he thought he seemed like someone who didn't have any friends either. Sunwoo isn't sure if he should take this as an insult, but he tells Cian that right now, he doesn't have the luxury of leisurely making friends. However, under his breath, he tells him to help him get into stocks. Cian is not sure how he can help him with stock, so Sunwoo then quickly reminds him about how he had mentioned yesterday that he has an account. Sunwoo plans to share information about some promising stocks to invest, and they both will split the profit. If this is what it takes to become friends, Cian is more than happy to partner with Sunwoo. But before making any hard cash, our guy decides to get through this day first. Later that night, Sunwoo stands at the exact spot where he saw himself getting stabbed in the preview. Right on cue, the dagger comes from behind, aiming for his back. But the blade fails to penetrate as it hits something solid. The shock of the failed thrust leaves the attacker trembling. Sunwoo spins around, facing the hooded bastard, and casually asks if he's familiar with the concept of a bulletproof vest. He then reminds the guy that he had to spend 300,000 won just to buy this thing, so he demands compensation for the loss. The hoodie guy has no clue what this kid is rambling about. Frustrated, he decides to swing his dagger again. This time, Sunwoo uses a water bottle he'd been holding to block the attack. The dagger stabs into the bottle instead. Sunwoo quickly jerks the bottle a little, and the weapon slips out of the thug's hand and clatters to the ground. But the bastard quickly pulls out another knife, expecting Sunwoo to be caught off guard. However, it seems like Sunwoo already anticipated this. That's exactly why he got 2 water bottles. With the bottle in hand, he charges at the hooded guy like a maniac, while demanding he reveal his identity. Seeing this maniac charging toward him, the hoodie guy starts to recoil, and in his panic, he accidentally trips over his own feet, falling flat. But he quickly recovers and tries to run down a nearby back alley. Sunwoo, not willing to let him get away, gives chase. Just like before, he's slow. And even with those 15 rounds of training from the preview, he can't catch up to the dagger-wielding bastard. But despite that, he isn't ready to give up. He chases with all his might, with his jaw clenched tight. Just as he's getting left behind, the thug suddenly gets an order from someone, and unexpectedly, he stops running and turns to face our boy. Beads of sweat start forming on Sunwoo's forehead because what just happened was totally out of syllabus. His panic only grows when he notices this dagger-wielding bastard getting closer. This time, it's Sunwoo who recoils in fear. His clumsy step backward causes him to topple over, and the dagger-wielding thug quickly leaps at him. Sunwoo barely manages to stop the attack, holding the bastard at bay with the dagger just inches from his face. It's basically a tug-of-war with life on the line. If Sunwoo slips for even a second, he's dead. He's pouring every ounce of strength he has to keep the dagger from reaching him. Right at that moment, Yeji Nuna miraculously bursts onto the scene. She sees the assault and immediately commands the thug to drop the knife, going so far as to threaten him with getting shot if he doesn't comply. Eventually, the bastard loses all his nerve and bolts, running away as fast as he can. Nuna quickly kneels beside Sunwoo to check if he's okay. Later, the two spend some time together, and she questions him about the incident. She asks if he saw the attacker's face, or if he suspects anyone. But Sunwoo doesn't respond to her query, as he is lost in his thoughts. He's lost, because in the 15 rounds of training he did yesterday, not once did that bastard turn around and attack again in this exact spot. Nuna assumes that the whole ordeal must have been a truly traumatizing experience, since Sunwoo isn't saying much. She reassures him that it's okay to feel shaken, but he quickly tells her he's fine. She then curiously asks about the body armor, and how on earth did he know something like this was going to happen. Sunwoo quickly makes up a story about how he takes after his father and gets scared easily, so he sometimes wears the armor out of habit, even on normal days. As ridiculous as it sounds, Nuna finds it lucky that he happened to be wearing it this time. Anyway, she assures him that once she gets to work tomorrow, she'll find the culprit, even if it means going through all the CCTV footage in the neighborhood. She then remembers he mentioned something about money earlier and pulls out some cash she brought for him. But instead of being thankful, Sunwoo immediately asks if she has any plans to invest in stocks or crypto. Nuna seems thoroughly annoyed and cuts him off mid-sentence, telling him to stop talking. She finds it absurd that he's rambling about investments right after nearly getting killed. Sunwoo, however, desperately tries to convince her, pleading with her to just trust him this once. But Nuna grows even more frustrated, warning him that gambling, no matter how certain it seems, always starts like this, with people convincing themselves they can't lose until it ruins them. He argues that he's not like that and promises it will never happen, but his mind flashes back to today's incident. He recalls how the thug turned to attack him again, even though this scenario hadn't appeared in any of his training sessions. For the first time, Sunwoo begins to admit to himself that there's always a chance of failure, no matter how prepared he thinks he is. Nuna then pulls out a small taser. She explains that it's a stun gun for self-defense and that he should keep it at home for his safety. She's clearly worried since trouble seems to find him wherever he goes. Before leaving, she firmly reminds him to lock the door tightly and get some proper rest. As the clock ticks to 11 p.m., Sunwoo quickly puts the headset back on. This time, he wants to preview the exact moment when that knife-wielding bastard turned back to kill him. Since he wants to figure out the identity of the hooded guy, Sunwoo takes note of his height, the shoes he's wearing, the black mask, and the hat. All of his clothes are black as well. On top of that, he notices the guy is wearing wireless earphones. It doesn't take Sunwoo long to figure out that he must be taking orders from someone. The most striking detail, though, is a tattoo right above his ankle. Even after replaying the incident in his mind and reviewing everything he observes, Sunwoo only manages to gather a few distinctive features, which aren't enough to piece things together. For now, he decides to move on and focus on what might be the worst thing waiting for him tomorrow. As soon as he enters the virtual world, it seems like a pretty normal day. Sunwoo checks his phone to take note of the stocks. He quickly memorizes the top 3 stocks that are rising the most for the next day. Then he contacts Cian and asks him to come to school early the next morning. The next day arrives. It's 7 a.m. and only Sunwoo and Cian are in the classroom. Our boy fills Cian in about the stocks to invest in and once again reminds him that they'll split the profit in half. If there's any loss because of bad suggestions, Sunwoo reassures Cian that he's willing to cover it himself. Sunwoo then asks Cian how much he's ready to invest. Cian modestly replies that it's not much, but he can put in around 100 million won. Of course, Sunwoo feels annoyed seeing his friend act like a rich snob again. But as he thinks it over, he realizes it's like borrowing money for just a day. So, he tells Cian to start small and try with 10 million won instead. The class starts as usual, but Sunwoo's eyes stay glued to the clock, anxiously waiting for the stock prices to rise. Eventually, the moment comes, and they end up making a profit of 3 million won. This leaves Sunwoo absolutely amazed. He's stunned at how well it worked. Cian curiously asks how Sunwoo knew this would happen. Sunwoo simply shrugs and says he's been studying stocks for a while. True to his word, Cian promises to split the profit. He even hands over some cash right then and there, saying he'll bring the rest tomorrow. Sunwoo, however, is bewildered to see Cian carrying so much money. He asks why he's walking around with such a large amount, pointing out how dangerous it could be. Meanwhile, Cian seems genuinely excited and is already looking forward to doing this again tomorrow. He tells Sunwoo that if he can figure out the rising stocks for the next day, he's ready to invest the full 100 million won. Back at home, Sunwoo stares at the cash he made today, along with the allowance Lady Nuna had given him. His mind flashes back to the argument they had yesterday when, after some heated words, she slid the money toward him. As he picks up the other stack of money, the profit from today's stocks, his mind also flashes back to the time when he received this money. And he also remembers Cian expressing his eagerness to invest 100 million won tomorrow. Sunwoo finds himself conflicted with his mind. He isn't sure if he should continue with this or step away while he still can, because as Nuna said, it might turn into an addiction after all. Unsure of what to do, Sunwoo decides to distract himself and puts on his headset. But as soon as he does, the hologram greets him with unpleasant news, which is that he's been demoted from level 6 to level 5. This makes no sense to Sunwoo, and he immediately questions the hologram about it. It explains that the increase or decrease in levels is determined by experience points. Of course, our boy finds this completely unfair and complains, but the system doesn't bother responding to his protests. Instead, it coldly informs him that one of his skills has also been downgraded to level 5. Annoyed, Sunwoo simply decides to see the worst thing that can happen tomorrow. The system complies, and the next moment, he finds himself standing in what appears to be a construction site. He then suddenly hears muffled pleas for help. He follows the sound, and as he turns around, he discovers a guy tied to a pillar, his head covered with a plastic bag. The man introduces himself as Seong Baeoman with his shaky voice. Without hesitation, Sunwoo pulls the plastic bag off the man's head. As he does, we come to know that this is one of the thugs who robbed Cian out of his money outside the PC cafe. This thug is just as surprised to see our boy as our boy is to see him. He even starts thinking that maybe Sunwoo is the one who kidnapped him and tied him up. So, he tries to convince our boy that it was Woongmin who beat him, so he should be let off the hook. But Sunwoo tells him straight up that he didn't kidnap him. Byeomin isn't buying it though, since it's just him and Sunwoo in this place. He then grabs a broken piece of a bottle to cut this bloody jerk loose. But the second the straps come off, this guy doesn't waste any time. He slams himself into Sunwoo, sending him crashing onto an iron rod that kills him instantly. The pain is brutal, and Sunwoo writhes in pain even in real life. Never in his wildest imaginations had he thought that he is going to get screwed by the same guy whom he is about to help. He's pissed and goes back to training, and we once again find that same thug tied to the pillar again. But this time, Sunwoo doesn't offer any help. Instead, he starts beating the crap out of the guy. Sunwoo steps up his game, threatening Byeomin and warning him that if he doesn't start giving clear answers, things are about to get a whole lot worse. He starts his interrogation by asking if Byeomin did anything today bad enough to get himself kidnapped. Byeomin admits to taking about 1,000,000 from a junior at school. Sunwoo doesn't stop there. He follows up with another question, asking which junior it was. Byeomin quickly blurts out Sion's name. Hearing that, Sunwoo starts piecing things together. Could this thug have stolen money from Sion, leading him to kidnap this bastard? But no matter how hard he thinks about it, it just doesn't add up. Something feels off. He decides to dig deeper before drawing any conclusions, and moves closer to the trembling guy and casually asks if he drinks. Byeomin admits he had a little to drink and quickly apologizes. That's when Sunwoo's eyes catch something, a detail he hadn't noticed before. His gaze lands on Byeomin's ankle, and what he sees sends a small shock through him. It's not entirely unexpected, but now there's a strong possibility that Byeomin is the dagger guy, the one with the tattoo on his ankle. The next day at school, we find Byeomin talking on the phone with his buddy Woongmin, while Sunwoo keeps a close watch on him from the shadows, staying low-key. Seems like Byeomin is already planning his next move. He's thinking about robbing Sion again, and seems pretty pumped as he tells Woongmin he's found out the class name of that rich kid. Right then, Byeomin barges into the classroom where Sion is sitting and calls out his name loud enough for everyone to hear. Sion has no clue why Byeomin's calling him over, but the thug motions for him to come outside for a moment. Once they're alone, Byeomin accuses Sion of being the reason he got his shoulder injured by that suit guy, the one who had helped them out before. He claims the injury still hurts, so he wants compensation for it. Sion quickly offers his wallet without a fight or argument. Byeomin grabs it and checks inside, and sees the fresh, new bills. He shoves the cash into his pocket and, before turning to walk away, tells Sion that half of his pocket money is now his. And if Sion doesn't bring more next time, he'll be in serious trouble. Sion just bows his head and agrees to what Byeomin says. The thug then also reassures him that if anyone messes with Sion, he'll make sure to take care of them. Right at that moment, Sunwoo steps in and calls out to Byeomin. He surprises every one of us by bowing his head respectfully and apologizes for misbehaving with his senior the other day. But of course, this apology isn't genuine, it's just a cover. Sunwoo's real goal is to confirm something he's been suspecting all along. Playing it cool, he points out that Byeomin's shoelaces are untied and asks if he should tie them as a sign of apology. Byeomin would love to receive VIP treatment, so he agrees. Sunwoo crouches down, pretending to tie the laces, but instead, he starts feeling Byeomin's thick leg muscles. He even throws in a compliment, saying they're impressive. Byeomin proudly mentions that he used to be in the track and field club. That's the moment Sunwoo seizes the opportunity. He subtly pulls up Byeomin's pant leg just a bit, and there it is. The lightning-shaped tattoo on his ankle. Sunwoo's suspicion is finally confirmed. Byeomin, completely unaware of how badly he's just messed up, walks off happily, thinking he's won. Meanwhile, Sunwoo thinks about how he had a hunch from the start, and now it's no longer just a hunch. It's the cold, hard truth now. Later that night, Byeomin is stumbling down the street, totally drunk. He is on the phone call and proudly boasts to his friend about how much he's had to drink. That's when Sunwoo sneaks up from behind and, with a quick jolt, hits Byeomin with a stun gun. The bastard is immobilized instantly, collapsing right there on the spot. Sunwoo doesn't waste any time. He grabs a two-wheeled trolley, loads the limp thug onto it, and drags him into a building. Once inside, he ties Byeomin down to a pillar, ready to get some answers. After all the time he spent last night, Sunwoo has pieced together why he was stabbed with a knife, and he knows who gave the order. He's already threatened and tortured Byeomin in the training sessions, but the guy kept denying any knowledge until the very end. But Sunwoo knows that without solid evidence, the police won't be able to do anything, and this bastard will get away with it. Also, the tattoo on Byeomin's ankle might not be unique to him. He needs to confirm that as well. He leans in and asks Byeomin why he has the tattoo on his ankle, his voice sharp with intent. Byeomin is dazed and is not sure what would be the right answer. He asks if Sunwoo hates tattoos, and if so, he offers to remove them right away. But Sunwoo isn't interested in Baeoman's excuses and cuts him off, telling him to just answer the damn question. Baeoman finally gives in and explains that he was on the track and field team in middle school, and that's when they all got the same tattoo as a group. Sunwoo presses him further, asking how many people got the same tattoo. Baeoman reluctantly answers that it is more than 10 people. Sunwoo then orders him to name everyone. But before Baeoman can respond, Sunwoo's phone rings. It's a video call from Xian. Sunwoo answers quickly, and his heart sinks when he sees Xian's battered face on the screen. Without thinking twice, Sunwoo starts to bolt and tells Baeoman to stay put even though this bastard can't even move. As he's trying to talk to Xian on the phone, he sees someone peel the tape off Xian's mouth. The poor guy immediately starts begging Sunwoo to save him. Between breaths, he explains that he was worried about Sunwoo, so when he went to check on him at his house, he was suddenly dragged and kidnapped. The video call camera zooms out, and we see this dagger bastard in the frame. The dagger guy makes a direct threat, warning Sunwoo that if he reports anything to the police, Xian will die immediately. He is confident that Sunwoo is smart enough to figure out their current location. He gives an ultimatum. If Sunwoo doesn't show up by tomorrow, Xian is as good as dead. This sends Sunwoo into full panic mode. He bolts out of the building as fast as his legs can carry him, leaving Baeoman behind, still tied to the pillar and squirming because he desperately needs to use the toilet. Later we find Sunwoo back at his place, completely out of breath. He's overwhelmed, knowing he can't report this to the police without putting Xian in more danger. To make things worse, he's not even sure if he even has the ability to figure out the kidnapper's location by tomorrow. But then he remembers. Of course, he has the ability. It doesn't take long for him to remember his headset. If he uses it, he might just be able to track down the kidnappers in time. This realization also sparks a troubling thought. Could the kidnappers know about his preview ability? The scene shifts to the dingy apartment where Xian is being held captive. Two thugs sit in front of him, visibly annoyed by his voice. To shut him up, they quickly slap the tape back over his mouth. The mastermind behind all of this is none other than Woongmin. One of his dim-witted friends looks over at him, hesitant, and asks if what they're doing is really okay. But Woongmin shuts him down with a sharp, cold glare. He reminds them that he's done far worse things in the past, and this is nothing compared to that. To understand Woongmin's ruthlessness, we rewind a few days. In this flashback, we see this mafia boss, a dangerous-looking man who radiates authority. The boss orders Woongmin to take down both Sunwoo and Xian. He gives a chillingly specific command to bring 2 knives and stab Sunwoo with them. Woongmin is confused by the strange request, and dares to ask why it has to be knives. The mafia boss gets annoyed. He picks up an ashtray and strikes Woongmin across the head. The blow is enough to send a clear message. The boss, whose name is Hyung, sternly reminds him that orders from above aren't to be questioned. If they say stab, we stab. Woongmin does not ask the next question and agrees to carry out the order. Before dismissing him, Hyung hands him a wireless earpiece and instructs him to keep it on at all times. In the present, Woongmin reflects on how, just a couple of days ago, Sunwoo seemed to know exactly what was about to go down. He was already wearing a bulletproof vest, and out of nowhere, the police showed up too. All of this makes Woongmin even more curious. He's dying to know what's really going on, who wants Sunwoo dead, and why they're doing this. He's not sure what's going to happen once Sunwoo arrives here, and just the thought leaves him scared out of his mind. He even starts considering surrendering. Meanwhile, we're back with Baeoman, who's also feeling terrified. When he hears the muffled sound of clothes rustling, his fear grows even more. But it turns out there's nothing to worry about since it's just our guy, Sunwoo. Sunwoo doesn't waste any time. He gives Baeoman a simple deal: answer one question correctly, and he'll let him go. Baeoman, desperate to save himself, immediately agrees. With that in mind, Sunwoo asks him about Kim Woongmin's hideout. Fast forward 30 minutes, and the lackeys of Woongmin are looking worn out. The fat one, in particular, is getting super frustrated because his food delivery still hasn't arrived. Just as he's grumbling about it, there is a knock on the door and he happily rushes to open it, thinking that his delivery must have arrived. As soon as the fatty opens the door, he gets stunned by a stun gun and drops to the floor instantly. The second guy lunges at Sunwoo when he sees his friend on the ground, but Sunwoo quickly dodges and slams the guy with his helmet as hard as he can. Afterward, Sunwoo finds his friend in the next room, while Woongmin is trembling in fear. The way Sunwoo seems to know everything makes it clear that he's practically unbeatable. Without hesitation, Woongmin breaks the window, jumps out, and starts running. Sunwoo chases after him, trying to call him back, because the worst thing that could happen today involves Woongmin himself. Apparently, Woongmin is going to die right in front of our boy if this doesn't stop. Sunwoo tells this bastard bluntly that if he keeps running, he's going to die. This finally makes Woongmin halt. He turns back to demand how he could possibly know that. Sunwoo points ahead toward the end of the alley, explaining that just beyond it lies an 8-lane road. If Woongmin keeps running like this, he's going to get hit by a truck. Right now, Woongmin isn't as shocked by the news of his potential death as he is by how Sunwoo seems to know everything. The disbelief on his face says it all, but Sunwoo doesn't give him much time to dwell on it. Instead, he demands an answer to his question, asking who the mastermind is, the one ordering him to stab and kidnap. The bastard, on the other hand, feels a smug satisfaction seeing how our boy knows many things, yet he still does not have a clue about the one pulling the strings. Well, the preview training our boy had only got him this far, so he does not know what is going to happen next. So for now, he decides to de-escalate. He calmly tells Woongmin to act like today's incident never happened. He even promises not to report anything to the police. All he wants is to go back into the apartment, take Seon, and leave quietly. But Woongmin hesitates, unsure if letting Sunwoo walk away is the right move. If he does, he knows he'll be in trouble with Hyung. The moment those words slip out, Sunwoo catches them. Without a moment's delay, he asks Woongmin which Hyung he's talking about. He begins moving towards this bastard. To intimidate him further, he reminds this guy that he indeed has abilities, so running away isn't an option. Meanwhile, Woongmin starts panicking. His voice grows frantic as he suddenly yells, telling someone to shut the hell up. His frustrated voice catches our boy's attention, and he does not waste any time before asking this bastard with whom he is talking to. Woongmin tries to deny it, stumbling over his words, but Sunwoo stays composed. He firmly but calmly tells Woongmin to hand over the wireless earphones. At this point, Woongmin's fear only worsens. He freezes as a final message comes through the earpieces from his boss. Whatever is said breaks him completely. With wide, desperate eyes, he asks Sunwoo to save him. Before either of them can act, a little explosion happens at the back of Woongmin's head, and the guy drops dead instantly. The sight of the murder, happening right in front of him, leaves Sunwoo utterly devastated. His knees buckle and he falls to the ground. The scene transitions to the parking lot outside the police department, where Seon and Sunwoo are sitting. Seon notices the tension on Sunwoo's face and asks him if he's alright, but our boy brushes it off, responding that he should be more concerned about himself since he's the one who got kidnapped and beaten to a pulp. Despite this, Seon can't help but worry about Sunwoo, pointing out how tense and scared he seems. Sunwoo admits that witnessing a literal murder unfold right in front of your eyes is more than enough reason to be shaken. His friend then invites him to stay at his place for the time being. He mentions that his father, after hearing about everything that happened, has already assigned a bodyguard for extra protection. At that moment, Nuna appears to deliver some bad news. She reveals that she just received a call from the hospital, where she learned that Kim Woongmin had passed away during emergency surgery. She goes on to explain that Woongmin's earphones and phone have been sent to the National Forensic Service for inspection. Based on the testimonies of the runaway kids involved, the police plan to launch an investigation into the people connected to Kim Woongmin. Nuna then turns to Seon and asks if he's alright. Seon responds positively, assuring her that he's fine. She follows up by asking who his guardian is, given that his parents are overseas. Shin casually replies that Butler Kim will arrive soon. Right on cue, a sleek Mercedes slams on the road, and out steps an elegant woman who is here to escort Seon back. The boy waves goodbye before hopping into the car, which speeds off smoothly. With Seon gone, Sunwoo considers leaving as well, assuming the investigations are over. However, Nuna stops him, reminding him not to go alone. She points out that Kim Woongmin had tried to stab him just yesterday, and later died from a head injury caused by an unknown explosion. Given that Sunwoo is the only witness, things are far from resolved. She apologizes if this is upsetting, but as a result, he is currently a suspect in Kim Woongmin's murder case. Whether he meant to or not, he did kidnap and threaten Beomin as well. She tells him that she will take responsibility for him, and has decided to shelter him at her place temporarily. Sunwoo isn't thrilled by the idea, and gets annoyed at the thought of living with a woman who lives alone. Nuna chuckles and reminds him that she's often away for work, so she usually doesn't stay at home anyway. Once Sunwoo finally steps into her apartment, he's absolutely baffled by what he sees. The entire place is packed with gym equipment. There are weights, machines, and even a punching bag hanging in one corner. It looks more like a private gym than a living space. She points out a vacant room and tells him he can use it starting today and begin unpacking. Sunwoo, however, reminds her of the terms of him staying here, which include her not entering his room without his permission. Well, she knows this much already, since it's typical for teenagers these days to demand their privacy. Sunwoo quickly locks the door and starts unpacking his things. Compared to the rooftop room he used to live in, this place feels far safer, but he's unsure if his headset will still work properly in this new environment. His thoughts are interrupted when the headset suddenly activates and tells him to put the device on. Startled, he instinctively covers his mouth, realizing he might have reacted too loudly. He cautiously peeks outside the room and asks if she overheard anything. But to his relief, she seems completely oblivious, busy with her intense muscle training. She's so focused that it's clear she didn't hear a thing. Sunwoo goes back into the room and puts on his headset. Almost immediately, the hologram congratulates him for leveling up. But Sunwoo is completely blown away to see that he straight jumped from level 5 to 7. The hologram adds more good news, informing him that his hearing has been enhanced for the next 10 seconds. This means that while using the reply skill, he can amplify the volume of any part of a conversation he wants to hear more clearly. At first, Sunwoo doesn't realize the full potential of this new feature, but his mind suddenly perks up when he remembers the conversation Woongmin had with that caller in the earpiece. He activates the feature and is pulled back into the preview, where he sees Kim Woongmin standing in front of him. Just as Woongmin begins to speak with someone on the phone, Sunwoo amplifies his hearing abilities. Through the reply skill, he hears the caller giving Woongmin a final warning to turn around and run away. The caller threatens that if he doesn't listen, he'll be killed immediately. Before Sunwoo can hear any more, the 10-second enhancement comes to an end, and he's snapped back into reality. He notices that the voice in the earpiece had already been altered to mask its identity, but now he at least has a solid lead that there was definitely someone who detonated the explosion that killed Woongmin on the spot. It's basically similar to when Woongmin turned around to stab him instead of running. After putting the pieces together, he finally realizes there's someone more powerful than him, someone who knows about his preview ability. In order to figure out what the worst-case scenario could be tomorrow, Sunwoo activates the preview skill again. This time, he finds himself in a place that we have seen before. Nuna is in front of him, her belly bleeding heavily. She tells him to run, but before he can move, she collapses from weakness and dies in his arms. The next morning, Sunwoo steps out of his room. Nuna can be seen preparing some juice and offers him a glass as well. But Sunwoo, still dazed from the preview, isn't really paying attention to her or the drink. His mind keeps drifting back to what he saw, and he's left completely stunned by the possibility of what might happen. Nuna snaps Sunwoo out of his thoughts, telling him to just drink the juice because it's good for him. Sunwoo then suggests that she wear a bulletproof vest the next time she goes outside. Of course, Nuna gives him a look like he's completely lost it. She asks how she's supposed to wear something so heavy all day when there's no threat. Sunwoo insists, trying to reason with her. He tells her to just wear it for today. Nuna just acts nonchalant, saying she'll think about it. He then suggests she install an emergency alert app, just in case. Seeing how worried he is, Nuna pats him on the head to ease his worries since he must still be shaken up from that crazy incident yesterday. Just for his sake, she finally agrees to install the app, though she does it with a chuckle, clearly amused by his concern. While at school, Sunwoo reflects that he does not know where that place is located where Nuna died. He can't follow her around all day like a cop. He can't force her to wear a bulletproof vest either. He remembers the time of Nuna's death, around 3:35, and realizes there's less than 2 hours left. He has to find her and somehow prevent it, but the preview had started when Nuna was already stabbed. No matter how much he trains, he can't seem to figure out any other way. He even tries drawing the place from memory, but just sketching out the room isn't enough. He needs to figure out where this place is actually located. Sunwoo starts thinking about calling Nuna to tell her everything, but doubts if she would even believe him. At that moment, Sian approaches him, asking if they're going to trade stocks today as well. He then notices the sketch Sunwoo has made and says it looks like a room salon. He's amazed at how much detail Sunwoo's put into it. The mention of room salons catches Sunwoo's attention, since it's a place where shady adults tend to go. He asks Sian how he knows about such things, and Sian responds casually, saying his mother used to work in places like that when he was young. While his mother worked, he would hang around and play video games in a room that looked just like the one Sunwoo had sketched. Sunwoo asks if there are gangsters or dangerous people in places like that, to which Sian responds that, even when he was young, there were always a lot of scary-looking guys hanging around. Suddenly, Sian gets a phone call from his bodyguard, who is literally standing right outside the school gate. Sunwoo asks if the man at the gate is actually his bodyguard, and Sian responds positively. When our boy looks outside, he realizes that this is the same guy who had saved them outside the PC cafe not long ago. He is sure that this bodyguard must be a skilled fighter, and Sian affirms it. He further states that they can ask for his help if they ever get into any trouble. This little favor from Sian comes off as a great hope to our boy, who immediately says he actually needs help right now. This is a life-or-death situation, and it's urgent. Later, we arrive outside a luxurious hotel known as High Heaven. Inside, Nuna is seen introducing herself to the attendant. Apparently, she's here to meet someone named Kyung-sang. The receptionist quickly grabs a walkie-talkie, asking if Kyung-sang-hyung is available. After a brief pause, the receptionist guides Nuna further into the hotel, telling her to go to room 6. As soon as she enters, that gangster, Hyung, quickly recognizes her that she is officer from local police department, and he asks her why she is here and who exactly she is. Nuna does not waste time introducing herself and asks him if he knows a student named Woongmin. Of course, this bastard feigns ignorance as if he doesn't know anything. So Nuna tries to give him a description of Woongmin's appearance and reminds him that he was an 18-year-old student who died yesterday. They have also found recent call records between him and Woongmin. Hyung tries to convince her that he is a businessman who receives phone calls only God knows how many. But Nuna is here to expose this bastard. She states that when investigators retrieved data from Woongmin's broken phone, they came across a file recording. She plays it right away, where Hyung asks about the progress of the mission, and Woongmin responds that he has detained Cheon Sunwoo's friend and carried out all of their instructions. Now that this bastard has finally been exposed, he decides to get violent. He pulls out a sharp knife and starts moving toward her in order to stab her in the belly. The lady also takes her stance to fight this sucker. As soon as he swings at her, she ducks away, grabs the hand holding the knife, and then delivers a crushing elbow smash right to his face. The knife drops to the ground, and the bastard drops to the floor as well. She knows that these recent incidents are not the work of some lousy local thug, so she orders him to spill the beans on who ordered him. The bastard doesn't answer her question, so she decides to tie his hands behind his back in order to drag him to the police station. But just then, the door to the room begins to creak open, and a man stands over the gate. Meanwhile, the receptionist sits quietly at his desk, probably watching some brain-dead TikTok videos. But he is soon startled by our boy, who asks if he can open the door because he wants to get in for a moment. Of course, the receptionist doesn't take our boy seriously and considers him just a kid. He tells him to go away, but Sunwoo insists, saying it won't take more than a few minutes. However, once again, the receptionist's answer remains the same. Since this bastard isn't listening, our boy gives him a cold glare and tells him to open the door while he's asking nicely, as he's already short on time. The receptionist obviously isn't here to take any crap from a high schooler, so he punches our boy hard enough and then launches a full barrage of punches. He grabs Sunwoo by the hair and finally decides to drag him inside to kill him. But just at that moment, Sian appears on the scene and tells this shithead not to hit his friend. Sian asks his friend if he is okay, but it's clear that Sunwoo is obviously not okay. So Sian plays his ace up his sleeve. He shouts at the top of his lungs for his bodyguard, Yongho. That gigachad of a man gracefully walks into the scene and politely demands the receptionist to open the door. The receptionist quickly makes a beeline toward Yongho to attack him, but the bastard gets beaten himself, and that single punch from Yongho was enough to knock him out. Once he drops to the ground, Yongho gives him some death glares while telling him to open the door or he'll break it down himself. Sunwoo quickly grabs the shithead by the collar and demands that he tell him about the police Nuna who just entered. The receptionist is too dazed to say anything, so Yongho grabs him by the hair like a toddler and tells him to start speaking. The guy quickly responds that she's in room 6. Once Sunwoo finally makes it into room 6, he finds that Nuna has already been injured, and the wound on her belly is bleeding heavily. Sunwoo cries his heart out, blaming himself for not stopping this from happening earlier. Meanwhile, Yongho hears some unpleasant bastards calling out to him. As he looks, we see that the entire place is literally swarming with a ton of these thugs, and it's clear they don't have good intentions. They ask Yongho who the hell he is. Yongho, ever the calm and composed gigachad, quietly slides Sian inside the room and assures him that he'll handle the rest. As soon as Yongho turns to confront the thugs, one of them charges at him, but Yongho ducks smoothly and retaliates with a devastating punch that sends the bastard flying. Another thug charges at him with a bat in hand, but he too ends up taking a hit instead. Yongho continues to pummel one bastard after another, taking them down with ease. Inside the room, Sian pulls out his phone to call the police. However, Nuna stops him, saying she has already called them. She then gently places her hand over our boy's face after seeing him crying. She then asks him how he even managed to find her, because if he stays honest with her, that's the only way she can truly help him. The scene transitions to the police department, where Sunwoo is taken into a chamber for interrogation. A man introduces himself as Detective Gu Sungtaek, the one in charge of this area. Our boy immediately asks about Yeji Nuna, and the detective reassures him that he saved her life. If it had been even a little later, things could have ended in disaster. Detective Gu starts asking questions, wanting to know everything, starting from the moment when Sunwoo felt something bad was going to happen and made Nuna install a location tracking app on her phone. The detective is also curious about one specific detail, how Sunwoo, at the critical moment, managed to bring the bodyguard of his school friend Sian into the mix. It just doesn't add up. Detective Gu wants to know if all this was based purely on a gut feeling. Sunwoo, unfazed, asks the detective if there's something wrong with that. The detective responds with a no. In fact, Sunwoo saved a Korean police officer's life and deserves recognition for it. But here's the thing. This is now the 4th time our boy has been involved in a police investigation, including today. Even if we set aside Park Jang-sok's bullying case, and also digress his father's suicide, there are still 2 major incidents. First, Woongmin's murder, and now, getting involved in an active police investigation. The officer wants to know how he's been able to do all this, because it's just too much to be chalked up to bad luck or coincidence. Right at that moment, the detective's phone rings. It seems like he got a call to let Sunwoo go. So he tells our boy that he can leave now, but also gives him a final reminder, don't get into trouble and try to stay out of the police station in the future. Later, Sunwoo meets Nuna at the hospital and asks if it hurts a lot. She says the pain isn't the problem though. The real issue is that she let the suspect slip right in front of her. Hyung escaped, and she got stabbed by a masked thug. The news is already out that an active-duty detective was rescued by a private bodyguard. What's bugging her the most is that she's being exposed for meddling in a case that's outside her jurisdiction. She's feeling pretty embarrassed to face anyone. Sunwoo quickly apologizes for putting her in such an awkward spot. Anyhow, she decides to bring up the time when Sunwoo insisted she wear that bulletproof jacket. She asks him how he knew something like this would happen to her, but our boy doesn't respond directly. Instead, he vaguely says that it won't happen again, and starts walking away. Before leaving, he tells her that since she is going to be hospitalized for over a month, she better rest well, and he will visit her later. Once he gets back to his apartment, he sits quietly in his room, lost in thought. His phone alarm blares, reminding him that it's already 11 p.m., which is finally time to use his headset once again. The headset also tells him to wear it, but he refuses. It calls out to him once again, which finally flips the lid for Sunwoo. He gets frustrated and kicks the headset hard. By now, Sunwoo has figured out that this cursed device doesn't just show him previews of bad things, it also drags him into those bad situations too. If it were just about him, he could handle it. But seeing the people he cares about get hurt, or worse, die, is something he can't bear anymore. In a fit of rage, he grabs a dumbbell, ready to smash the headset to pieces. But just as he's about to destroy it, the doorbell rings. Cut to the parking lot outside, we see bodyguard Yongho. Inside the car, we also catch Seon, and it looks like he is here to report his current situation to our boy. Yongho has already briefed Seon's father about what happened today since he had no choice, because today's incident was all over the news. Our boy, feeling responsible, decides to apologize. He feels bad that Seon got dragged into this mess, especially since it's making his father worried about him. He is pretty sure that Seon's father must have told his son to stay away from someone like our boy, but surprisingly, Seon reveals that his father is actually quite intrigued, and wants to know if Sunwoo has psychic abilities, like a shaman who can foresee the future. Of course, Sunwoo quickly responds that he doesn't have anything like that. Seon sighs, saying it would have been better if he did. After all, it's pretty rare for his father to take an interest in someone so easily. After that, Sunwoo leaves the car, realizing there's not much left to talk about. Meanwhile, we cut to Detective Gu at an abandoned construction site, where he's meeting that lowlife bastard, Hyung. Detective Gu wastes no time and orders him to raise his hands and step out. He immediately asks if he was the one who stabbed Officer Shin. Hyung quickly denies it, saying he only intended to threaten her and then run away. He admits they might play rough in their neighborhood, but they would never dare stab a detective on duty. He insists he doesn't know who stabbed the officer, explaining that the thug who attacked her was masked. Hyung is willing to own up to the murder of Woongmin and the person who ordered him to stab Sunwoo as well. Detective Gu presses him to explain more clearly, and Hyung nervously says that if explain anything in detail, he might really die. He reveals that he got an order from above to have Woongmin stab Cheon Sunwoo, but Woongmin failed, and the pressure to succeed was relentless. He admits he couldn't refuse because the order came from someone high up, directly given to him, so he had no choice. Detective Gu asks who that person is, but just as Hyung is about to reveal the name, a direct headshot from Detective drills a hole right through his skull. It turns out this bastard had been warned. If he said the name, he'd be dead. This detective always seemed kinda suspicious to me, and it looks like he's a snake after all. Afterwards, he makes a phone call to his boss. He says he cut the tail, as ordered, and the secret has been kept. The next day arrives, and as Sunwoo is getting ready for school, he reflects on how he ended up not using the headset last night after all. Walking down the street, he notices a delivery rider coming from behind. Sunwoo gets spooked and, in a panic, falls to the ground. The delivery driver slams on the brakes just in time, but the little incident is enough to make Sunwoo's heart skip a beat. Later, he thinks about how he was almost hit by a motorbike, which means that the worst thing he was expecting to happen today has already passed. But just as he thinks this, a football slams right into his face, making his nose drip. Later, sitting in class, he can be seen biting his nails, anxiously wondering what bad thing might happen next. Seon notices the distress on his face and asks him why he looks like that. Sunwoo says he's fine, just a little anxious. But Seon isn't convinced. He's been noticing how Sunwoo has been acting completely out of character lately. It seems like Sunwoo is also starting to get a little psycho, impulsive, and obsessive just like his father. Suddenly, an alarm blares throughout the school. It's followed by an announcement from the school administration office. The alarm was triggered due to a malfunction in the fire alarm system. Students are instructed to stay calm and continue with their regular activities. That's when Xian notices something odd. Sunwoo isn't in his seat. Instead, he's under the table, begging Xian to save him. Later, we see Sunwoo riding in Xian's Mercedes. He calls Nuna, telling her he's not feeling well and won't be able to visit her. Shin then asks him if he might have something like a panic disorder, because this is the only thing that explains his unconditional anxiety. Sunwoo doesn't respond but thinks to himself, what would this rich brat know about feeling insecure and scared? He looks at Xian, who rides to school in a sturdy luxury car, always accompanied by a bodyguard who could take on a dozen gangsters single-handedly. Sunwoo can't help but think, if only I were rich, I wouldn't have to live in constant fear. Once they drop him off at his apartment, Sunwoo waves goodbye and heads inside. He feels a wave of relief that nothing bad happened and that he made it home safely. Still hungry from skipping meals due to anxiety, he decides to prepare something to eat. He reaches for the gas knob to fire up the burner for some ramen but suddenly freezes. His fear kicks in and he wonders, what if the gas explodes? Unable to shake the thought, Sunwoo decides not to risk it and ends up eating the ramen raw instead. Feeling exhausted from all the tension and having not slept a wink the previous night, he lays down to rest. The scene transitions to a dark forest in the middle of the night. Rain pours heavily, drenching the figure of a man tied up, shirtless. This is Cheon Woohwan, our boy's father. An authoritative figure stands in front of him, demanding some sort of evidence. Cheon, battered and bloodied, replies that he doesn't have anything. The response earns him a vicious kick to the face. The bastard continues pummeling him mercilessly, mocking him for his wife, Myung Ji-hyun, a brilliant detective, vanishing without leaving behind any trace of evidence. He makes it crystal clear that if Cheon doesn't give him the answers he's looking for, the beatings will only continue. Just then, the bastard's phone rings. He picks up, exchanges a few words, and then, unexpectedly, decides to spare Cheon's life. But his mercy comes with a warning. From now on, Cheon is to live as a useless shell of a man. Even if he knows something, he's to keep his mouth shut. Before leaving, the bastard brings up Cheon's son, Sunwoo. The twisted grin spreading across his face makes it clear that whatever plans he has for our boy, they are not good. Sunwoo suddenly jolts awake and he is pretty out of breath. It seems like what he saw was just a dream, but to him it felt far too real. He can't help but feel anxious as thoughts of his father linger in his mind. It's almost 11 p.m. when the familiar voice of the headset prompts him to put it on. Sunwoo hesitates, unsure if he should use it again. But then, he remembers the time when he had made copious amounts of money through stocks. A thought takes hold. If he becomes rich, he could finally have a personal bodyguard like Xian. Even more, Nuna wouldn't have to take on dangerous jobs as a cop anymore. She could finally live peacefully. With this in mind, Sunwoo puts the headset back on, convincing himself that everything will be solved once he's wealthy enough to change his life. As he enters the virtual world to preview the worst thing that will happen, he finds himself in a modern, lavish living room. Across from him sits Xian, with an extravagant spread of fancy food laid out. The timestamp indicates it'll be 7 p.m. when this scene takes place. Seeing how calm and normal it all looks, Sunwoo is relieved. He figures nothing significant or dangerous will happen that day. With his mind at ease, he shifts focus to his goal. He decides to start preview training in order to carefully observe and memorize the trends of rising stocks to prepare for his next move. The following day, Sunwoo approaches Xian in class with noticeably lighter spirits. Xian picks up on it right away and smiles, glad to see his friend looking so much better than the anxious wreck he was yesterday. Sunwoo quickly leans towards Xian and asks if he can still invest 100 million won in stocks. But Xian casually replies that he can even do 150 million if he wants to. With that green light, Sunwoo excitedly shows him a list of stocks that are set to rise. Xian promptly gets to work. He divides the investment equally, putting 50 million won into each of the 3 companies Sunwoo mentioned. Meanwhile, Sunwoo has already started doing mental math. With a 30% return on each investment, he could easily earn more than 20 million won today. During the lunch break, Sunwoo sits anxiously, staring at his phone. He's so fixated on the results that he doesn't even feel hungry. Xian checks in, mentioning that 2 of the stocks they invested in have already exceeded a 20% increase. But instead of being thrilled, Sunwoo grows concerned. All 3 stocks were supposed to rise, but one of them, the lithium-focused stock, hasn't moved at all. The only explanation that crosses his mind is that someone who knows about his abilities must have interfered. The thought that someone has the power to manipulate stocks like this sends Sunwoo into a panic. He feels certain that there's no way he can compete with someone like that. In a rush, he turns to his friend and tells him to sell all 3 of the stocks they bought today. He's got a bad feeling and insists that they do it quickly. Without wasting any time, Xian sells off the stocks, and they end up making a profit of 20 million won today. But Sunwoo doesn't seem as happy as he should be. Xian, noticing his friend's unease, asks him why he is not happy since they made a profit. Deciding to cheer him up, Xian suggests they celebrate by having dinner at his place tonight. Later, they arrive at Xian's apartment, and the butler greets them with a warm welcome, saying that dinner is already ready. Sunwoo feels a bit out of place in the lavish environment. The fancy food and elegant setting only make him more anxious. The butler hands over an envelope to Sunwoo, and Xian explains that it contains 10 million won, half of today's profit. Sunwoo is not sure how he is getting paid since cashing out sold stocks takes time. But Xian states that he just paid in advance since he was in a good mood. However, he wants his friend to answer his one question. He asks Sunwoo how he managed to predict today's stock trends so accurately, noting that even top stock experts struggle to pull off such profits in a single day. Of course, Sunwoo tries to act nonchalant, brushing it off and insisting there's no special ability involved. Xian looks a little disappointed and mentions that his father has always been fascinated by people with extraordinary abilities. His father believes that somewhere in the world there must be someone who can see the future, someone who could live without fear of the unknown. Sunwoo reflects on how that's actually true in his case, but he still has a long way to go. He's determined to figure out who this mastermind is that keeps interfering with his life. Meanwhile, Xian shares his dream that one day he will surpass his father. Confused, Sunwoo asks what that even means. Xian simply says it's his lifelong wish, but then, out of nowhere, Xian coughs up a copious amount of blood. Panicked, Sunwoo shouts for bodyguard Yongho to help. It looks like the Giga Chad Yongho is in a bit of a pickle. He's blocking a big, intimidating man with a mustache from entering the room. Naturally, the mustached man isn't thrilled with Yongho's attitude. Yongho addresses him as president and tells him to leave since there's already a guest inside. But the big man doesn't back down. He places a heavy hand on Yongho's shoulder and says he's only here to quietly greet the guest and doesn't want things to get complicated. Without waiting for permission, he strides into the room. When Sunwoo sees the man, he immediately asks who he is. Xian explains that the man is one of his father's juniors. The man greets them politely and introduces himself as Lee Mokpyo. Sunwoo cuts straight to the point, reminding him that there's no time for pleasantries because Xian just coughed up blood. To Sunwoo's surprise, Mokpyo doesn't seem concerned in the slightest. This leads Sunwoo to suspect that it's not the first time Xian has had an episode like this. Sunwoo asks Mokpyo if he knows anything about the illness, but the man casually replies that he's not really Xian's guardian, so he doesn't know much. Xian reminds the man that if his father knew Mokpyo was visiting him, he wouldn't be pleased. But Mokpyo just shrugs it off, saying that if he always obediently follows orders, no one will take him seriously. Instead, he believes that one should always do things that others dislike in order to grab attention. He goes on, saying a man has to do whatever it takes to earn his bread and butter, even if it means taking the steel bars out of the apartments just to survive. And if they keep doing that, the building will eventually collapse. He tells Xian to clearly convey this message to his father. Sunwoo isn't sure what this man's deal is, but he knows he'll find out soon enough. The scene then shifts to the hospital, where Sunwoo asks Nuna if she knows who this man is. She recognizes him immediately. That's Lee Mokpyo, the chairman of Goal Construction. She explains that Mokpyo is famous. About 10 years ago, he was a national gang executive, but now he's reinvented himself as a businessman. She's curious as to why someone like Mokpyo would visit Xian's house. Sunwoo isn't sure either, but he can tell that they don't seem to get along. Speaking of Xian, she asks Sunwoo about his blood coughing condition. He explains that Xian has some sort of incurable brain illness and that he's come here to try and heal it. Nuna then warns him that if Xian is associated with someone like Mokpyo, he should keep his distance. But Sunwoo is concerned. What if that bad person is harassing Xian? She reminds him that's exactly why she wants him to stay away from Xian. Even she, as a police officer, can't easily handle matters involving people of that level. Later, after Sunwoo returns to his room, he stares at the headset and his mind drifts toward making money. He thinks to himself that if he could do that, there'd be nothing to fear in the world. Suddenly, the headset begins to blare again, telling him to wear it. Sunwoo quickly puts it on, eager to see what the worst thing that will happen tomorrow is. In the preview, he finds himself at some sort of abandoned place, where a gangster is also present. The gangster challenges him, saying if Sunwoo can punch him in the nose just once, he wins. Sunwoo has no clue who this bastard is or how to react, but the gangster just responds with a hard kick to our boy's ribs, sending him crashing to the ground. Writhing in pain from just that single hit, Sunwoo hears the man remind him that if he fails to punch him on the nose, he's going to be killed for sure. The man then opens the bag he's carrying. As he turns it over, stacks of cash tumble out, raining down in front of Sunwoo. The gangster tells him that if he wins, he can have the money, 300 million in cash, right then and there. The preview ends and Sunwoo is jolted back to reality. He's still clutching his side, the sensation of that bone-crushing kick fresh in his memory. It didn't feel like he was kicked by a human. It was more like being hit by a wild beast. Sun Wu is sure of one thing: this is no ordinary man. He knows he's not someone he can beat with a few training sessions from the previews. In fact, he's starting to wonder why he's even fighting a monster like this. He considers his options, thinking about reporting the incident to the police or asking the bodyguard for help. But before he can act, his phone rings. The caller ID shows an unknown number. Hesitantly, Sun Wu picks up the call. The voice on the other end is cold and direct, telling him they're about to leave an address and that he'd better make sure to be there by 6 p.m. tomorrow sharp. Sun Wu tries to reason with the caller, demanding to know why he should follow the advice of someone he doesn't even know. The caller's voice turns cold and threatening. He warns Sun Wu that if he doesn't come alone or dares to involve the police or anyone else, his secret will be exposed. With that, the caller hangs up, leaving Sun Wu frozen in fear. If this man knows about his secret, then he must also know about his abilities. Sun Wu realizes he's trapped. He can't even ask for help. The next day, he reluctantly shows up at the designated place. Just as he saw in the preview, the gangster is waiting for him. The man smirks and repeats the challenge terms and conditions. He carefully lays out the rules and rewards before the game begins. Without hesitation, the bastard launches at Sun Wu with full speed. His first move is a powerful kick, but Sun Wu ducks just in time. Wasting no moment, Sun Wu pulls out the stun gun that Nuna had given him. But this bastard is fast. Too fast, in fact. He grabs Sun Wu's wrist in an instant, jerks the stun gun out of his hand, and slams him against the wall with such force that Sun Wu feels like his insides are rearranging themselves. Before Sun Wu can recover, the man pulls out an axe. He swings it with terrifying strength, but to Sun Wu's surprise, the blow was only meant to intimidate him. The gangster mocks him for his inability to last even 10 seconds. He taunts Sun Wu, calling him a pathetic brat who supposedly has the ability to see the future yet can't hold his own in a fight. He then states that from now on, they'll meet at the same time every day. If Sun Wu can't endure longer than he did the previous day, he's going to die for sure. With that, the mysterious gangster disappears into the darkness, warning Sun Wu that if he tells anyone about their encounters, he'll be as good as dead. Sun Wu, with no room to argue, reluctantly accepts what's happening and prepares for the inevitable. The next day, he faces the gangster once again. The battle begins almost immediately. After a few exchanged punches, the gangster can already tell that Sun Wu has improved. The night before, Sun Wu had used his preview training to prepare. He quickly realized that the gangster always targets his abdomen. This time, since Sun Wu lasted longer than the previous day, the gangster decides to let him slide for now, and he starts to walk away. But the hit Sun Wu took wasn't just a random attack. It was part of his plan. Gathering every bit of his strength, Sun Wu swings a punch back at the gangster. However, the gangster is one step ahead again. With ease, he grabs Sun Wu and throws him aside like trash bag. The gangster scolds Sun Wu for trying to be oversmart. He even calls him out for wearing a bulletproof vest, saying he could feel it when he landed the knee smash. The gangster warns him not to outsmart himself, explaining that the key to this fight is to let his body react instinctively, without overthinking it. He then tells Sun Wu they'll meet again tomorrow. Our boy returns home after that humiliating defeat and spends his time practicing, determined not to back down. A while later, the hologram appears to warn him that excessive use of the preview ability may have adverse effects on his body. But Sun Wu doesn't stop. He pushes on with his practice. The next day at school, Sun Wu is seen holding a palm exercise device. Xian walks up to him and asks what he's doing. Sun Wu, with his unusual cocky attitude, replies that he's training, which is pretty obvious. But Xin points out that he's been running around the field every break lately, and this sudden exercise seems new. Sun Wu shrugs, saying he's not entirely sure himself. He just wants to experience something new. Speaking of exercise, Xian reminds him that he has a personal gym for his bodyguard and has recently started getting personal training for his health there. He invites Sun Wu to join them as well. Later, they arrive at Xian's private gym, where we also meet Yang Ho, the loyal bodyguard. It's clear that Sun Wu is growing desperate to pick up some tips and tricks from this experienced Giga-Chad. Sun Wu hesitates for a moment before admitting that there's someone he needs to fight. Yang Ho offers to step in if someone's been bothering him at school, but Sun Wu clarifies that he wants to win the fight himself. It's someone incredibly strong, and the condition for winning is to punch the guy square in the nose. He earnestly begs Yang Ho to teach him how to land the perfect punch. Hearing this, Yang Ho pulls out a jump rope and offers it to Sun Wu. He tells him that the first step in training is to build stamina, starting with basic jump rope exercises. Sun Wu is confused and asks how long he's supposed to do it. Yang Ho tells him to do it until he can't jump anymore. Frustrated, Sun Wu grumbles, wondering why he has to train like this when all he wants to learn is how to punch someone's nose. Yang Ho, however, reminds him that no matter what technique he learns, it won't matter if he doesn't have enough stamina to back it up. If he really wants to win, he needs to start building his endurance right away. Later that day, Sunwoo drags his exhausted body to the construction site. His legs wobble with every step, and he looks so beaten that he can barely stand upright. His disheveled state catches the gangster off guard, who raises an eyebrow and comments that he looks like he's about to collapse at any moment. Sunwoo admits he can barely stand after overdoing his training. Standing straight alone feels like a monumental effort, so he tells the gangster to just kill him now and get it over with. He's sure he won't last a second in the fight. Gangsters seem really fascinated to see someone so fearless. Sunwoo responds dryly, saying he's thought about dying so much lately that it's become tiresome. The gangster tries to motivate Sunwoo by reminding him about the 350 million hard cash that awaits him, but our boy believes that it does not matter since he is in no position to fight. The gangster sighs in disappointment. Sunwoo's lack of concern for money, or even his own life, makes it hard to find a way to motivate him to fight. If Sunwoo doesn't fight, the gangster threatens that he'll make his next move tomorrow by going after that lady Sunwoo cares about. And when he finds her, he'll kill her without hesitation. Of course, this little comment was enough to boil Sunwoo's blood, and he quickly charged toward the bastard, trying to land a punch under his chin. But the guy dodged quickly, ducking down, and threw a devastating punch of his own. The punch was enough to make Sunwoo almost gag, and he fell to the ground. The bastard began pummeling the hell out of him, while my guy just continued threatening that if he even touched Nuna, he would kill him. The gangster became absolutely thrilled to see that Sunwoo could still move his arms and legs so well, even after taking such a beating. He then grabs Sunwoo by the collar and throws him back down, leaving him dazed and on the brink of losing consciousness. The bastard, on the other hand, just walks away. Sunwoo returns home and trains relentlessly. Not only does he make sure to run, but he also pushes his body harder in the gym. He kept repeating this cycle, fighting the bastard over and over. This continues for many days, and an entire month passes, with Sunwoo following the same routine. After that 1 month, Nuna is finally discharged from the hospital and returns home. Sunwoo is on the verge of tears seeing her back again. She comments on how he didn't even visit her for over a month and barely contacted her, which makes her wonder what kept him so busy. But as she looks at him closely, she can't help but notice the changes. His shoulders are broader, his muscles are more defined, and he even seems to have grown taller. This isn't a body you can achieve in just a month, she thinks. And she's right. If you account for all the time Sunwoo spent replaying and previewing his training sessions, it's as if his body has undergone more than 6 months of growth. Deciding to celebrate her return, Nuna suggests going out for dinner to have some pork ribs, but Sunwoo quickly declines, saying he has something important to take care of today. Later that day, Sunwoo finally faces the gangster again. The gangster, not holding back, makes it clear he won't go easy on him since he has already taken a month of preparation. But Sunwoo isn't interested in exchanging words. Without hesitation, he charges at the bastard, his fists clenched and ready. The gangster retaliates with a powerful leg swing, but Sunwoo ducks just in time, letting the kick pass over his head. This time it seems like Sunwoo is finally matching the reflexes and agility of the gangster. Even this bastard is momentarily taken aback by Sunwoo's performance, and that brief distraction gives Sunwoo just enough time to land a solid punch right into his opponent's gut. Although the gangster tries his best not to react, he visibly struggles to keep himself from doubling over. He takes the hit without much outward response, but it's clear that he's annoyed. According to him, he had been doing Sunwoo a favor by limiting his attacks to the abdomen to avoid bruising the rest of his body. Now, however, he's certain it's time to change tactics. Sunwoo charges forward once again and delivers another successful punch. The bastard retaliates with a kick of his own, but this time, Sunwoo blocks it, saving himself from a critical hit. He then counters by swinging a kick back at his opponent. The gangster, after taking the hit, mocks our boy for copying his technique. But we already know that after hours of studying countless previews and replays, replicating a move like this is nothing for Sunwoo. Sunwoo charges at the gangster again, but this time, the bastard catches his leg mid-attack and throws him forcefully to the ground and climbs on top of him. Sunwoo attempts to strike back with a punch in order to touch this bastard's nose, but his arms reach their limit before they can land, leaving him vulnerable. The gangster doesn't hesitate and unleashes a relentless barrage of punches that pummel Sunwoo mercilessly. After pummeling Sunwoo enough to leave him struggling for breath, the gangster steps back momentarily. He warns Sunwoo that if he tries another sneaky attack like this, he will kill him without hesitation. Sunwoo has had enough of this bastard's bullshit. He is sick of this shithead spending the past month doing nothing but issuing empty threats while holding back. It's clear to him now that this isn't a genuine attempt to kill him. Instead, the entire situation feels like some twisted form of training. At first, Sunwoo believes the so-called mastermind behind everything wants him dead. But as time passes and he continues to survive these brutal encounters, he realizes this isn't the case. If they truly wanted him dead, he wouldn't still be standing. The only logical conclusion is that the gangster's real goal is to sharpen his abilities, not to end his life. The gangster doesn't seem fazed by Sun Woo's thoughts. He dismisses them with indifference, making it clear that whatever Sun Woo is thinking doesn't matter. Sun Woo recalls the events from 2 months ago, when he first suspects the existence of someone who knows about his abilities. He remembers how Kim Woongmin, acting under someone's orders, tried to stab him. That moment solidifies his belief that someone far more powerful is pulling the strings. Since then, Sun Woo has referred to this unseen figure as the mastermind. Sun Woo is certain that this gangster is either the mastermind himself or acting under the mastermind's orders, just like Woongmin had. However, after an entire month of constant encounters, Sun Woo is also convinced that this gangster cannot be the mastermind. There's no way someone so powerful would reveal themselves so early in the game. Through these grueling battles, he has finally figured that his abilities grow tremendously when he faces life-threatening crisis. His powers seem to thrive on fear. It's now clear to him that the mastermind has been orchestrating these dangerous situations to push his abilities to their limits. Simply put, the mastermind wants Sun Woo's powers to evolve, and this entire month of nonsense has been part of that plan. Over the past few months, he's developed various abilities through reviewing and replaying events. Yet for the past few days, his growth has hit a standstill. Neither his abilities nor his level has improved. More importantly, he's no longer afraid of fighting this gangster. If the purpose of these encounters is to force his growth, then there's no point in continuing unless the stakes are raised. It needs to be scarier, more dangerous. Sensing that something has changed, the gangster quickly reaches into his pocket and pulls out an earpiece. He decides to contact his master to verify whether Sun Woo's suspicions are actually true. Sun Woo quickly warns the gangster not to put in the earpiece, reminding him that it was the very device that caused Woongmin's death. But the bastard doesn't listen. He places the earpiece in his ear and connects with his boss. Once he confirms all the details with his master, he receives his next set of orders. As he starts walking forward, he declares that it is finally time for Sun Woo to awaken the eyes of self-awareness. These eyes, he explains, are considered the ultimate skill for self-protection. Moving forward, there will no longer be a need for him to rely on something as primitive as a shamanic tool to see into his future. At that moment, he plays that projector on the wall, revealing Nuna being held hostage. A gun barrel is pointed directly at her head. At that very moment, the gangster swings his axe toward Sun Woo, this time without holding back. He tells Sun Woo that if he wants to win this fight, he'd better open his eyes and step up. Sun Woo is overwhelmed by the madness of it all, and he starts running as fast as he can, hoping to outrun this lunatic. But the gangster is relentless, and it quickly becomes clear that escape is impossible. In a frantic bid to protect himself, Sun Woo grabs an iron pipe and swings it with all his might. However, the gangster easily stops the pipe and yanks it away with such force that it goes flying through the air, leaving Sun Woo vulnerable once again. The gangster swings his axe at Sun Woo once again, and this time, the blade grazes our boy's shoulder. The bastard swings his axe once again in order to sever our boy's head. By now, Sun Woo is pretty damn sure that he is going to die here. Only a miracle can save him from meeting his end. And then, just as expected, the miracle happens. Everything around him suddenly freezes in place. Out of the blue, his father's hologram appears right in front of him. The hologram explains that our boy has unlocked a new ability, known as Preview Hyperlink. It further reveals that in any future crisis situation, this skill will automatically activate. For 1 minute, within a 5-meter radius, Sun Woo will be able to observe and react to everything in real time, granting him unparalleled awareness and reflexes. As soon as the skill activates, Sun Woo can see everything moving slowly. He can see the axe moving toward him, inching closer with every passing millisecond. Without hesitation, he ducks backward, narrowly avoiding the strike. Capitalizing on the moment, he delivers a powerful kick straight to the gangster's face, sending him kissing the ground. The skill Sun Woo has just acquired grants him an unparalleled awareness of his surroundings. It allows him to perceive even the smallest details, including the video playing on the projector. With this heightened perception, he instantly recognizes that this video of Nuna is a deep fake created by AI. However, the ability comes with a limitation. It only lasts for 1 minute. Whatever the case, Sun Woo re-engages in the fight. The gangster swings his axe repeatedly, but every time he tries to strike, Sun Woo dodges effortlessly, weaving left and right as if the attacks are in slow motion. My guy then delivers powerful blows from every direction, pummeling the bastard relentlessly. As the ability finally reaches its limit, Sun Woo begins to feel the effects of the ability wearing off. At 50 seconds, his head throbs, and a wave of dizziness crashes over him. It feels as though his brain is shaking inside his skull, triggering the worst motion sickness he's ever experienced. The gangster, now battered and bruised, realizes he cannot match Sun Woo's eyes of self-awareness. He then puts the earpiece back in the ear and reports the current situation to his senior. He notes that Sun Woo's ability lasted less than a minute before its effects subsided, and that Sunwoo is now complaining of severe headaches. Then, out of the blue, the gangster drops to his knees and bows deeply before him. Introducing himself as Byun In-soo, he declares that the person Sunwoo calls master has ordered him to show respect. Sunwoo has countless questions he would love to ask, but the exhaustion overtakes him. Unable to stay on his feet any longer, he collapses to the ground. Byun In-soo notices the deep cut on Sunwoo's shoulder, which requires immediate attention. He picks Sunwoo up and begins walking. As they move, In-soo confirms that the master's main goal was indeed all along to train him. He further explains that the eyes of self-awareness demand immense physical endurance and strength, making them incredibly difficult to sustain. He warns Sunwoo that while the skill is powerful, it comes with severe risks. One critical danger lies in losing composure. If Sunwoo lets fear or rage consume him, he could become irrational, reckless, and dangerously violent. In such a state, there's a very real possibility he could unintentionally kill someone, transforming him into a murderer without even realizing it. After putting Sunwoo over the bed, In-soo opens his bag and pulls out a stash of Korean bills. He tosses the money to Sunwoo and tells him that if he continues to follow along and develop his abilities, much greater rewards will come in the future. Wrapping up his explanation, In-soo states that this is all the mastermind has instructed him to say. He also reminds Sunwoo not to share anything about this encounter with anyone. Finally, In-soo fills a syringe with a clear liquid. He assures Sunwoo that it's not a drug, but simply an anesthetic. Once he wakes up back again, he promises that he will feel well. A while later, Sunwoo wakes up and realizes his clothes have been changed, and his wound has been stitched up. There's also a stack of money nearby. He recalls what In-soo said, but still can't figure out why the master is doing something like this. The mystery surrounding the master runs so deep that Sunwoo can't even tell if this guy is good or bad. He thinks about discussing it with Nuna. Speaking of Nuna, he realizes that he's been away from home for quite some time. Panicking, he scrambles to check the time. It's almost 11 p.m., right around when his headset at home usually turns on. Quickly, he calls her, asking where she is. She replies that she's at home and asks him where he's been. He quickly responds that he will be home soon. Before hanging up, he tells her not to go into his room if she hears any noise coming from it. Staying on the call, he starts running back toward the apartments. The next scene transitions to Sion, who is on the phone call with his father. He reports to his father, explaining that they'll have to stop pushing to enhance his abilities due to time constraints. He is confident that everything will work out in their favor, and assures his father not to worry about anything. With that, he ends the phone call. Not long after, the butler lady approaches him, addressing him as Eye of Providence, and reminds him that it's time for his medication. The guy gives a small smile and replies that the medication is pointless now. He smirks like a maniac because he is not too far from his goal. Later, the scene shifts to Nuna's apartment. In front of her stands Sunwoo, out of breath, with a bag slung over his shoulder. She asks him why he kept insisting earlier that she shouldn't go into his room and what's with the bag he's carrying. Sunwoo brushes it off, saying it's nothing. The lady starts to tease him a little. She is sure that he's been watching something alone in his room every night. Of course, this leaves Sunwoo flustered, and he stammers, asking what on earth she's talking about. The lady doesn't beat around the bush and directly brings up the possibility that he's been watching porn. This leaves Sunwoo completely flustered as he denies it outright. However, she only grows more smug, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. She points out that if it's not porn, then it's suspicious how he always keeps his room locked and hides things. Overwhelmed and unable to come up with a proper response, Sunwoo storms toward his room, muttering defensively that he doesn't do anything of the sort. The lady continues to push his buttons, reminding Sunwoo that even if he is doing something like that, he should keep it moderate. She particularly warns him not to watch anything illegal, like recordings that shouldn't exist. With that, she decides to head to her room, mentioning that she has work early the next morning. When Sunwoo gets back to his room, he stares at the headset in confusion. It didn't ring while he was out, leading him to believe that perhaps the device only activates when he's nearby. The next day arrives, and the scene shifts to the police department, inside the office of the investigation division chief. Nuna is requesting to take over the murder case of Wong Min and the gangster Jo Kyung-sang's disappearance. However, the chief quickly denies her request, reminding her there are plenty of other cases she could focus on. He insists she shouldn't obsess over one where she herself got stabbed. He also points out that the case has already been transferred to another district. Frustrated, she counters by stating she's already checked, and that district hasn't made any progress in over a month. She questions why they're relying on those incompetent fools who can't even catch a local thug. Right at that moment, the snake of a man, Detective Gu Sung-taek, arrives on the scene. He throws a jab at Nuna, mocking her for being called incompetent. The chief promptly introduces him to her, explaining that Detective Gu Sung-taek was in charge of the Jo Kyung-sang case and has now been reassigned to their department, starting today. Nuna stays calm and introduces herself as Shin Yeji and apologizes for the earlier slip of the tongue. The chief then grabs a case file and tosses it toward Nuna, telling her to solve this case instead, adding that she'll also get an extra partner. The case is about the Gulchian neighborhood serial killer. In just a month, 2 male and 2 female students from a nearby region were raped and murdered using the same method, but the perpetrator has yet to be caught, and there are no clues to go on. The only connection between the murdered teenagers is that they all had accessed an illegal gambling site, which lured users in with free webtoons and OTT services. Detective Gu adds that it was a well-known case and that he closely followed it at the time. The chief reminds Nuna that the murders happened 7 years ago, long before she had even joined the force. However, she insists that she's ready to pursue it now. She joined the police to catch scum like that, and she vows to stay up all night, starting today, until she catches the culprit. Later we meet our boy, who is anxiously staring at his headset. Ever since he has gained the Eye of Self-Awareness ability, his headset has stopped responding entirely. He then picks up the bag full of cash and stares at the fat stack, thinking about how much more money he could have made if only the headset still worked. Suddenly his phone rings from an unknown number. Without hesitation he answers, and to his surprise, it's the gangster Byun-in Soo on the other end. The bastard is sure that our boy must be desperate to make some more cash, so he tells him to take a pair of gloves and a shovel capable of digging the ground. He promises to send him a map and tells him to be at the marked location by 10 a.m. the next day. If Sunwoo digs at the specified spot, In-soo claims he'll find an item that will earn him 1 billion won. The mention of such an enormous sum leaves Sunwoo completely stunned. In-soo further explains that he will find an item wrapped in a black bag at the dig site. Still in disbelief, Sunwoo asks if the job involves drugs or something illegal that might get him into serious trouble, but he assures him that this is not the case. Instead, the job is part of catching a vicious criminal. Sunwoo tries to get more information from In-soo, but the gangster brushes him off, saying he'll find out everything later. He warns Sunwoo once again not to let the criminal see his face, advising him to cover up as much as possible and go alone. The next day, the focus shifts to Nuna, now stuck with the snake of a man, Detective Gu Seung-taek, who has been assigned as her partner for the case. Gu, completely at ease, is casually slurping down noodles while she fumes. She questions whether she's supposed to handle all the investigative work by herself, pointing out that, from what she's seen, Gu hasn't done anything since last night. She's beginning to wonder if this is how they're supposed to catch criminals. She divides the area in half for both of them to cut the investigation time. Detective Gu finally speaks up, asking what exactly she was doing 7 years ago. Caught off guard, Nuna has no idea what he's getting at. Gu reminds her that, like her, he doesn't remember anything from that long ago. He argues that questioning locals about events from 7 years ago is a waste of time since no one remembers such details about other people's lives. He adds that the absence of any concrete clues is the exact reason this case has remained unsolved for all these years. Nuna reminds Detective Gu that idling around isn't an excuse, even if catching the criminals seems difficult. Gu nonchalantly asks her who said they couldn't catch criminals. He pulls out his phone and makes a call to someone named Reporter Kim. Gu casually asks if the assistant chief contacted him, what the conversation entailed, and whether there was a promise of a headline. Once Reporter Kim provides the information, Gu thanks him and confirms that it aligns with the 9 a.m. news. The scene transitions to a dimly lit apartment, where a laptop is powered on and a man is on the floor doing exercises to stay in shape. The TV in front of him broadcasts the morning news. The headline declares that the police have expressed a firm resolve not to overlook unsolved cases any longer. According to police officials, cases that have remained unsolved for more than 5 years cannot be left unattended. A session has been held to address this, and competent investigative personnel have been exclusively assigned to these cold cases. The news emphasizes that the priority focus is the 7-year-old Gulchian neighborhood serial killer case. The mention of this case grabs the man's attention. The reporter continues, stating that this infamous case, once labeled a perfect crime with no leads, has recently taken a surprising turn. Police officials claim to have secured evidence that could potentially identify the perpetrator. They express confidence in making a quick arrest, provided the suspect is still within the country. The man becomes visibly intrigued by this development. The idea that the police may have found a clue piques his curiosity, but he remains skeptical. He is certain that the only critical evidence would be what he buried at that location, and as far as he knows, no one else should be aware of it. He is convinced that it might be a bluff, so he plans to check the site personally to confirm if they've actually found anything. Later we find Sunwoo, shovel in hand, arriving at the designated location he was assigned to reach. He looks utterly exhausted from the grueling trek and climb, but what worries him more is how suspicious he must appear in his current getup. As he nears the location, the sight of a cross mark on a tree confirms he's in the right place. Sunwoo begins digging at the spot. After a short while, his shovel hits something, a large object buried beneath the soil. Pulling it out, he finds what looks like a giant egg. However, despite its size, Sunwoo is convinced it's far too small to contain 1 billion won in cash. Suddenly, we hear this familiar voice, and when Sunwoo turns around, we see that criminal who is here to investigate the location where he had hid the evidence of his crimes. The killer demands to know how he found this spot, but our boy remains silent, keeping his face hidden. The killer repeats his question, this time more sharply. He quickly deduces that Sunwoo isn't a cop, given his concealed appearance. His gaze then shifts to the marked tree. His expression hardens as he realizes that he hadn't left any sort of mark there. The killer lunges at Sunwoo with a dagger in hand, but just as he's about to strike, an axe comes spinning through the air. The killer barely saves himself. It's In-soo who threw that axe with such godly precision. The first thing he asks is why Sunwoo hasn't descended yet. The killer quickly shifts his focus and charges at In-soo instead, dagger aimed for a lethal blow. However, In-soo blocks the attack with his axe, knocking the knife away with a strong jerk. Up next, he puts the edge of his axe against the killer's neck, leaving him with no choice but to surrender. He then reminds our boy once again to leave the area immediately. Without hesitation, Sunwoo complies, bolting down the trail as fast as he can. The killer asks who he really is, noting that he doesn't look like a cop. In-soo replies that his case is being handled by Detective Shin Yeji from the main investigation division. The killer admits he has no idea how they found the location. But now that his secret is out, he wonders aloud if In-soo plans to turn him over to the police to claim the reward. But In-soo states that he has got some other plans. It doesn't take long for the killer to realize the inevitable, but In-soo tells him that he's not going to die just yet. He won't allow him to be thrown away like trash without a purpose. The killer starts yelling out of frustration, but his outburst is quickly silenced by a hard blow to the skull, knocking him out cold. 1 hour later, we find Sunwoo walking alone through the abandoned area. His phone rings and it's an unknown call from In-soo. As soon as he picks up, In-soo orders him not to open the container, not to touch it with his bare hands, and most importantly, not to leave any fingerprints on it. Sunwoo acknowledges the instructions, confident that he's not stupid enough to make those mistakes. But then, he demands an answer to his burning question. The masked man, is he the criminal? In-soo confirms this with a simple yes. Sunwoo then follows up with another question, asking if they should capture him and turn him over to the police. But In-soo responds firmly no. This answer frustrates Sunwoo, and he asks why not, especially since they now have the evidence. In-soo's tone remains nonchalant, telling him not to overthink it or burden his tiny brain with unnecessary details. He reminds Sunwoo to simply follow instructions, as that's the only way he'll get his promised 1 billion won. Our boy gets annoyed and asks what the remaining task is. In-soo tells him to go to the second room from the left at the end of the hallway. Inside, he will see 3 safes on the shelves in the room. The middle safe is empty, and Sunwoo is instructed to place what he's holding inside it and close it. Sunwoo follows the instructions and quickly asks when he will receive his billion won. In-soo reminds him that this is a test directed by the master. He explains that what Sunwoo just placed in the safe is the only piece of evidence that can prove the serial killer's crime, and that the middle safe will never be opened again. In-soo adds that the left safe contains 1 billion won in cash, while the right safe contains his daily wage of 100,000 won. He states that the safes won't be opened simultaneously, but it's a straightforward odd or even game. Sunwoo just has to choose one safe and take what's inside. However, In-soo throws a curveball. He reveals that the moment the safe with 1 billion won is opened, everything in the middle safe will be incinerated, disappearing without a trace. Of course, this doesn't sit well with our boy because if everything inside the middle safe is burned, it means the only evidence to catch the serial killer will vanish. In-soo agrees and promptly reminds him that he also has the option to take the safe containing 100,000 won. If he chooses that, the evidence in the middle safe will be preserved, but the 1 billion won in the left safe will be incinerated. Essentially, it's a challenge for Sunwoo. He must decide whether to take the 1 billion won and let the criminal go free, or take the 100,000 won and bring the criminal to justice. To make things even more intense, he only has 5 minutes to choose. If he doesn't make a decision within that time, all 3 safes will be incinerated. The clock quickly begins to tick down, and Sunwoo eventually decides to take the 100,000 won and go, as he can't let the evidence be burned like this. But then again, his human nature kicks in. His body naturally drags him toward the case containing 1 billion won, since it's like winning the lottery, instant wealth. However, if he opens the billion-dollar chest, he knows he'll lose the evidence. He grabs his head in frustration and plops down on the ground, unsure of what the right decision is. But then, he decides to think rationally. As soon as he opens the case with the lesser amount of money, the case with the $1 billion begins to smoke and burn right away, leaving him in absolute awe. His phone rings. When he picks up, Insu is fascinated that he burned 1 billion won in cash, and curiously asks Sunwoo if he doesn't need any money. To which Sunwoo responds, asking the bastard who doesn't need money. He adds that since the master has high foresight, he might have already known what choice Sunwoo was going to make. Insu confirms this, stating that the master just wanted to see if in similar future situations, would Sunwoo choose something like this over money. Sunwoo then reminds Insu that his late mother was a police officer who likely lost her life catching such heinous criminals. He says it wouldn't feel right for the son of a woman like her to act any differently. In response, Insu reassures him that the evidence will be handed over to the police in charge, so there is no need to worry. He also mentions that the sacrifice our boy made today will bring him even greater gift later. With that, Insu hangs up the call, leaving Sunwoo with many unanswered questions. The scene transitions to the police department, where Nuna reports to the chief that she's been answering endless calls from reporters about supposed clues to the serial killer. She complains that she hasn't been able to get any work done because of it. Most of the chaos, she adds, is due to a crazy guy spreading a rumor about a non-existent clue on the headline news of the national broadcast. Detective Gu corrects Nuna, pointing out that the ENS report was ordered by the deputy chief, so she shouldn't be calling him a crazy guy. But Nuna shoots back with sass, reminding him that since she's in charge of the case, he could have shared that information with her in advance. The leader cuts them off. He explains that to reinvestigate a cold case, they need to create some buzz. Thanks to the report, they've received a lot of tip-off calls, which is more efficient than conducting individual investigations. However, Nuna reminds them that not a single useful tip has come in so far. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. An officer enters carrying a package. He announces that the delivery is for the officer in charge of the Gulchian neighborhood serial killer case. Naturally, Nuna has no idea who would send her such packages. The officer delivering them mentions there's no sender name listed, but reassures her that the department scanned the packages thoroughly to ensure there were no bombs inside. When Nuna opens the package, it reveals the same black plastic bag containing evidence about the criminal. Alongside it is a note stating that the black plastic bag contains the criminal's DNA. The officer wonders aloud if someone is playing a prank. However, Nuna instructs him to trace the sender, launch an investigation, and request a comparison with the criminal DNA database to verify its authenticity. Meanwhile, the criminal is growing increasingly frustrated and angry in his apartment. With each passing second, he becomes more unhinged, punching the wall with all his might. He is furious, wondering why the evidence was taken out if they weren't going to hand him over to the police. As he continues to pummel the wall, his phone rings. It's the same unknown number as before. He picks it up, and after exchanging a few words, the serial killer realizes he is speaking to the master. The killer demands to know if the people who came today were sent by the master. The master calmly confirms it. The killer, now enraged, reminds the master of their agreement from 7 years ago, an agreement where the master promised to cover for him and ensure no one discovered he was a killer. Not only that, the criminal reminds the master that, after exactly 10 years, he had also promised to give him 1 billion won. But the master calmly corrects him, stating that it was never a deal, it was a game. The master asks if he's forgotten the conditions for winning and losing. Of course, this bastard remembers everything clearly. The game was to see if a teenager would overlook the crimes of a heinous criminal in exchange for 1 billion won. If the teenager chose the money, the criminal would face no consequences. That's why the criminal bet everything on the assumption that the kid would take the money. He asks the master what happened. The master confirms that his memory is correct, but also informs him that the kid has won the game. There was a teenager who chose to help catch the criminal instead of taking the 1 billion won. This revelation leaves the criminal utterly baffled. He's convinced the master must be lying. It's just unbelievable to him how could anyone give up 1 billion won. However, the master coldly reminds him that the evidence has already been handed over to the police and that his capture is inevitable. But then, the master decides to play one last game. In order to win, the criminal must kill Detective Shin Yeji, our Nuna, who is in charge of the cold case. He has until tomorrow to carry out the deed. If he successfully kills her, the master promises to help him flee safely to a third country. The criminal questions why he has to kill again, but the master doesn't give a clear answer. He simply hangs up the phone, stating that the criminal has no choice but to obey. The killer, resigned to his fate, grabs his helmet and jacket, preparing to do the deed. If this is the only way, then he's ready to carry it out. Later, Sunwoo arrives back at the apartment, only to find Nuna almost undressed. He quickly turns away in embarrassment, mumbling that he thought she must have stayed at work overnight and wouldn't be coming home. Nuna replies that she just came home to change clothes. She then asks him what took him so long. Sunwoo nervously responds, saying he was working out at the gym. She then asks him, why is he working out so hard these days? Of course, Sunwoo can't tell her that in order to use the eyes of self-awareness properly, he needs more physical and mental strength. so he just says that he was working out for fun. The lady pats him playfully on the shoulder and, before leaving, tells him to make sure he locks the door and gets some sleep. As soon as she's gone, the headset in his room suddenly shouts at him to wear the device. This catches Sunwoo off guard because it's been several days since the headset was turned off, and now it's finally activated again. He quickly puts the helmet on, and as he does, he even gets a little teary-eyed at the thought of finally seeing the hologram of his father. But instead, standing before him is a woman dressed in an officer's uniform. It wouldn't be surprising if she is his mother, but Sunwoo doesn't recognize her. He wonders who she is, but when he reads the name tag on her uniform, he quickly realizes that she is, in fact, his mother. He is left absolutely boggled out of his mind. Tears flow uncontrollably as he sees his mother for the first time since she passed away. After her death, his father removed all of her photos from the house, making this moment even more overwhelming. He wants desperately to talk to her, but since it's just a hologram, she doesn't respond beyond her programmed functions. After some time spent crying, he finally calms down and decides to start by testing the hologram's abilities. He asks for a preview of the worst thing that will happen to him tomorrow, but his mother replies that this skill is unavailable. Frustrated and confused, he tries again, asking for details about what happened to him today. Once again, the hologram responds that such a skill doesn't exist. That's when the hologram reveals her only available skill, the ability to show a preview of someone else's life. The current target is Shin Yeji, meaning he can see 10 seconds of information that could be useful to her. Curious, he activates the preview, and what he sees leaves him absolutely shocked. Without a second thought, he rushes out as fast as he can to save her. While running, he calls Yeji and warns her to be careful, but she brushes it off, thinking he's just rambling nonsense. Right on cue, that criminal pops up right in front of her. She hops out of her car, and the guy pretends his leg is broken from the collision. She quickly moves to help, offering her shoulder to support him and guide him into her car. But as soon as she does, the bastard grabs a tissue soaked with a liquid that's clearly meant to knock her out. She manages to break free with sheer strength, pulling herself away. In an instant, she draws her gun and points it straight at him. The criminal smugly claims that a single whiff will leave her as dizzy as if she's drunk a bottle of soju. She demands to know who he is. He casually answers, revealing he's the serial killer who's been keeping everyone on edge. He mentions that in his life, he's only killed kids because the thrill is unmatched, though he finds it disappointing that his last target is an adult. Before the bastard can stab her with his sharp dagger, Sunwoo appears. He kicks the killer hard in the face, sending him flying a few feet away. Sunwoo turns to her, asking if she's okay, but she is too dazed to say anything, and wonders if he is Sunwoo. The killer quickly realizes the boy in front of him is the same one he saw in the mountains before. He mistakes Sunwoo for someone working with the master and demands to know why he's interfering. For a moment, the killer feels panicked, because he suspects that they all might be working with the police. The lady, on the other hand, trembles and urges him to run, insisting it's too dangerous for him to be here. But Sunwoo reassures her, telling her not to worry about him. He tells her to get herself together and run because, in a fight for his life, he always wins. Before making any moves, he scans the area to make sure no one is around. Finding a perfect alley, he rushes into it, leading the killer to follow closely behind. But Sunwoo surprises him by turning back and swinging his kick. The killer quickly dodges and swings his knife towards Sunwoo, aiming to pierce him. The dagger connects but fails to penetrate, because my guy seems to be rocking a bulletproof jacket. Sunwoo counters immediately, slamming the bastard to the ground with a solid blow. The killer recovers quickly and swings the knife again, narrowly missing Sunwoo by mere inches. Sunwoo then takes off his bulletproof vest and tosses it aside, catching the killer off guard. With a quick kick, Sunwoo knocks the dagger out of the killer's hand. But the bastard reacts quickly and grabs the knife midair and swings it as fast as he can. At that moment, Sunwoo activates his preview hyperlink ability, which allows him to slow down and perceive everything within a 5-meter radius, as if time has stretched. Using this skill, he anticipates the killer's movements and grabs the bastard's hand. He then steals the dagger and immediately drives it into the killer's foot. The bastard screams in pain while Sunwoo warns him not to move a muscle. If he so much as twitches, Sunwoo makes it clear he won't hesitate to finish him off. But this bastard isn't just any street thug. He quickly tries to kick Sunwoo with his other leg, then yanks the dagger out of his foot. The fight continues, blows exchanged rapidly between the two. However, Sunwoo is one step ahead with his ability, anticipating every move the killer makes, and continues to pummel him relentlessly. Meanwhile, the detective stands there, eyes wide in shock, watching in disbelief as Sunwoo beats the hell out of the killer. Finally, with one last crushing punch, Sunwoo forces the killer to double over, collapsing onto the ground. It seems like Sunwoo is losing control. His ability has started to mess with his head just like Insu had warned him. He is feeling confident that he can see everything. He grabs the dagger from the ground, ready to stab the thug. But just as he's about to attempt this murder, Nuna calls out to him, telling him to stop. The command snaps him back to reality. His thoughts drift to the time when Insu had warned him that self-awareness requires tremendous physical endurance and strength, making it difficult to maintain for long without consequences. The most critical thing while using this ability is to maintain composure, because this ability can easily make you lose your rationality. Finally, Sunwoo stands straight, taking deep breaths to regain his calm. But the bastard decides to reap the benefit out of this opportunity, so he grabs the dagger and runs towards our boy, but Sunwoo reacts instantly and drills this bastard down to the ground. Sunwoo spots the same handkerchief the bastard used earlier to knock out Nuna. He grabs it and uses it on the killer in order to induce unconsciousness. His father's hologram suddenly appears, reminding him that he has escaped the danger. The hologram asks if he wants to exit the preview hyperlink, and Sunwoo quickly agrees. The moment he exits, he takes a breath. He turns to Nuna, reminding her that she caught the bastard on her own and hopes she understands what he means by that. Of course, she clearly understands what he means, but what she does not understand is how in the hell did he fight like that? Sunwoo hesitates, then finally owns up and reveals his ability, through which he can see the future. Before she can respond, he starts bolting away, telling her they'll talk about it in detail later. Nuna smiles as he runs off, relieved that he's finally opened up to her. She's glad that he's told her the truth. Well, that's messed up. I never imagined she was also tied up with that guy everyone is calling Master. Later, the media arrives at the scene, broadcasting the news nationwide. Headlines light up across the country. The infamous criminal who had been on the run for 7 years has finally been arrested. Inside the police department, an officer comes rushing, reporting to Detective Shin Yeji that the commissioner himself is interrogating the suspect alone. He is confused and wants to know why only the commissioner is involved. Detective Gu explains that the suspect insisted there are forces within the police working with a major criminal organization. The criminal claimed he didn't trust Yeji and refused to testify unless it was directly to someone at the commissioner's level. Given the seriousness of the allegation, the higher-ups were informed, and the commissioner immediately came in to handle the situation. Detective Gu further reveals that, at the suspect's request, all cameras and recording devices in the interrogation room have been turned off. It's just the commissioner and the chief officer inside, conducting the interrogation in total privacy. Meanwhile, inside the interrogation room, the commissioner starts the questioning, asking about the murders from 7 years ago, 2 male and 2 female innocent students killed within the span of a month. However, the criminal doesn't seem to view those kids as innocent at all. He begins explaining his backstory. He was once an aspiring webtoon artist, working hard to make his debut. To support his dream, he took on all kinds of odd jobs, manual labor, quick deliveries, anything to get by. After 5 years of effort, his debut work failed to gain popularity. But then, it found success on illegal sites, where it was read far more than on the official platform, attracting more comments and attention. He explains that his frustration grew when his work, which he had poured his heart and soul into, was being read for free on these illegal sites. But it wasn't just that. These illegal platforms were also linked with adult gambling sites, and the kids, young, naive, still wet behind the ears, were using the platforms to gamble their lives away, hoping for a quick cash win. The criminal is sure that these kids could not be called innocent, and after everything they were involved in. The commissioner reminds the criminal that he can't rationalize his actions with excuses. He lured the students in with the promise of gambling money, then killed them. That doesn't make them any less innocent. Then, the commissioner asks a pressing question. Why did he stop after killing 4 people? By his logic, he should have kept killing more students if that was his reasoning. The criminal falls silent for several minutes. But then, he decides to speak. He explains that the day after he killed his 4th victim, he received a call from someone claiming to be the operator of the illegal site. The caller told him that the people frequenting his site had grown suspicious and that he had to stop the killings. In exchange, the operator promised him 1 billion won right away and assured him they would destroy all evidence of his crimes. As impossible as it seemed, the criminal says the operator actually sent him 1 billion won in cryptocurrency. The operator also promised another billion if he refrained from killing for the next 10 years. The commissioner asks about these people behind the offer. The criminal explains that from the way the operator spoke, it sounded like a member of a cult. Even now, the criminal believes they have infiltrators within the police force. Now that he has revealed everything, he demands that the commissioner safeguard his life in return. He believes that if the people behind the illegal site, particularly the operator, find out he has cooperated with the police, his life will be in danger. But just as he finishes his plea, the lights in the interrogation room suddenly cut out, plunging the space into darkness. Even the commissioner has no clue what is going on. Meanwhile, outside the interrogation room, Everyone standing has already been put to sleep. The door swings open, and a tall figure enters. A man wearing a mask, his one eye hidden beneath an eye patch. Without a word, he strikes the commissioner with a single blow, knocking him unconscious. The masked figure then introduces himself as executor, and explains that he is here under the orders of the one who showed mercy and ended this man's crimes 7 years ago. The criminal begins trembling, panicking as he asks what they want. He asks if him facing the law is not enough for the master. The eye-patched man declares that the law doesn't know the full extent of his sin. His greatest crime is speaking without fear and arrogantly revealing everything about the master. In the name of the Father, the execution of the sinner must be carried out. With that, the masked man tosses the criminal off the top floor of the building. His final screams echo through the night, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. People rush to the body, pulling out their phones and snapping photos of the horrific scene. The next day, news about the incident spreads like wildfire. Commissioner Kang Junbeo has to issue a public apology and takes full responsibility for the incident by stepping down from his position. The scene transitions to a cathedral, where Nuna is praying. Sunwoo joins her, and they sit together. Sunwoo starts the conversation, asking why she wanted to meet him here instead of at home. They discuss the recent incident, and Sunwoo wonders how such a dangerous criminal could commit suicide in the police headquarters. But Nuna drops a brutal truth bomb that the serial killer, Choi Soon-chul, didn't commit suicide, he was actually murdered. The internal security of the main building had been completely breached, and no one knows the truth other than few people. Just then, another detective enters the scene and drops another bombshell that his father didn't die by suicide either. It was murder disguised as a suicide. Sunwoo has no idea who this man is or what he means, so the detective introduces himself as Chief Jong Dagon of the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit. He explains that he was a colleague of Sunwoo's late mother, Detective Myung Ji-hyun. Hearing this leaves Sunwoo on the brink of tears. He doesn't want to even consider the possibility that his father might have been murdered. He insists that he saw his father's body with his own eyes and even read the suicide note written in his father's handwriting. The idea that it was anything but suicide feels impossible to accept. Chief Jong clarifies that this is still uncertain, which frustrates Sunwoo. He lashes out, annoyed that the man boldly claimed his father was murdered but now seems to be backtracking. Nuna steps in to calm him down, reminding him of something important. She reveals that when she first met him, she wanted to tell him the truth, but couldn't. The enemy has eyes everywhere, and they had to wait for the right moment to act, as foretold by the Great Prophecy. The mention of the prophecy creeps the hell out of Sunwoo, and he asks what in the hell that even means. Chief Jong explains that his mother, Myung Ji-hyun, was an exceptional police officer. She solved many cold cases that everyone thought were impossible to crack. Her almost supernatural intuition made her famous, so much so that people started calling her Ji-hyun the Clairvoyant. Her performance was so impressive that she quickly rose through the ranks. But Sunwoo calls all of this nonsense. Even though he was very young at the time, he clearly remembers that no one in a police uniform showed up to his mother's funeral. That's why he grew up not even knowing his mother was a police officer. If she was such a capable detective, the police could not have dishonored her death like that. That's when Chief Jong drops another bombshell, which is that his mother didn't die in the line of duty. She basically didn't die as a police officer at all. Of course, this only enrages Sunwoo further, and he demands to know what the chief means and how a police officer can die not as a police officer. Chief Jong explains that in the last case his mother was working on, she faced immense pressure from unknown sources to drop the investigation. Her colleagues who tried to help her endured significant professional setbacks. As a highly skilled detective, it only took a moment for her to become an outcast within the police force. Commissioner Kang Junbeo, who resigned today, was the head of the Violent Crimes Investigation Unit back then, and he himself and she was part of that team. Almost 12 years ago at the police department, we see Sunwoo's mother, Ji-hyun, trying to argue with her boss to let her investigate the case on her own. But the head of the department gets annoyed and tells her that she doesn't have to pursue this case, and he doesn't want to upset the higher-ups more than he already has. Ji-hyun calls him out, accusing him of being more focused on his promotion than on doing what's right, groveling for favors just to climb the ladder. The head shamelessly agrees right away, saying that's exactly what he's doing because he wants to become commissioner. Then, he calms down a bit and asks her if she can't see the pressure coming from above, explaining that he definitely doesn't want to go against the higher-ups' wishes. He tells her they just need to grow their influence a bit more and wait for the right time. Ji-hyun, however, warns that if they miss this opportunity, they might have to wait another 10 years for another chance. She advises they gather their strength and stop the higher-ups now before they get any stronger. But the man dismisses her, saying he doesn't care. He tells her that she's no longer a cop, so she can leave her badge and get out. He makes it clear that if she disobeys orders again, she's going to be fired. Jihyun walks out of the office, visibly unsatisfied and frustrated. Just as she walks, Jong approaches her, urging her to stop making enemies everywhere. He warns her that she won't get anywhere by going head-to-head with the chief. He advises her to let it go and take on another case, reminding her that there are plenty of bad guys in the world for her to catch. But Jihyun firmly counters, saying there are some bad guys only she can catch and some fights worth taking on, even when you know you're going to lose. Jong asks what she means by that. Jihyun simply says she sent him an email with a schedule and tells him to read it tomorrow. She then apologizes, saying she's counting on him to handle things, and walks away. 2 days later, it's her funeral. Jihyun has left behind her husband and young son. We then see young Nuna rushing into Cemetery Chapel in order to attend the funeral. As she looks around, Nuna meets fellow officer Jong, who introduces himself as a member of the police force and tells her he needs to talk to her. They step into a quiet corner of the cemetery. They step into this empty church, where Jong explains everything that has happened. When Nuna hears that no one is attending Aunt Jihyun's funeral because they're afraid of getting on the wrong side of the higher-ups, she becomes furious. She questions what kind of cops these people are to abandon their colleague out of fear. But Jong does not dwell on it. Instead, he tries to highlight the potential Nuna has. He believes she can become an excellent cop and make a difference in this corrupt world, just like Jihyun was. He reveals that he's read what Jihyun left behind and, according to her prophecy, Nuna is destined to graduate from the police academy and work alongside him. He advises her to focus on her future and gives her a strict condition. Until he gives her permission, she should not meet Jihyun's husband or son in person. If she wants to stay in touch, she's allowed only brief email greetings. When Nuna questions the reason behind Jong's orders, he tells her simply that the time isn't right. He warns that if she clumsily tries to help Jihyun's family before the time is right, she will bring great misfortune upon herself. But Nuna refuses to back down. She feels deeply indebted to Jihyun and her family and is not about to chicken out just because of some prophecy. She finds it ridiculous that Jong even stopped her from attending the funeral out of fear, and she's frustrated by the situation. Jong, however, remains calm and explains that Jihyun passed away just 2 days ago, and it enrages him. He immediately tries to take over the case she was handling, but then he drops a bombshell. The day before, his own 13-year-old daughter committed suicide. Nuna is completely shocked, and Jong doesn't stop there. He reveals that it was actually a murder disguised as a suicide, but right now, he can't do anything because the people involved have that kind of power. He tells Nuna that this is all he can reveal for now, and advises her to remember, even if she knows the truth, to pretend she doesn't. He tells her to go with the flow and follow the path destiny has set for her. No matter how resentful, angry, or frustrated she feels, she has to endure it, because just as Jihyun's prophecy foretold, she must wait until Cheon Sunwoo, Jihyun's son, gains his abilities. I guess, now it makes sense. She's not involved with the mysterious master guy, but she knows about Sunwoo's abilities. In the present, Jong reveals that everything Sunwoo is experiencing is part of an ancient prophecy known as the Great Prophecy. According to it, Sunwoo was destined to grow up as a timid child, with fear constantly following him. But as he grows, that fear will form the foundation for him to gain abilities far superior to any other gifted person. The prophecy foretold that after Sunwoo's father is murdered, which will be disguised as a suicide, Sunwoo's powers will begin to manifest. That's when he will meet Shin Yeji, aka Nuna, who was deeply connected to his parents in the past. Jong explains that once Sunwoo confesses his abilities to Nuna, he will learn everything she and Jong know about the situation. At that point, an organization will try to approach him and will follow him wherever he leads. Jong also warns Sunwoo that when their luck starts to fade and Sunwoo's abilities surpass theirs, that will be the final opportunity to defeat them. This is all Jong reveals to Sunwoo. Sunwoo is in disbelief, questioning how anyone could believe in such nonsense. He clearly refuses to accept the idea that everything has been following the prophecy so far. Jong, however, states that he has told everything he knew, and everything has happened exactly as the prophecy predicted, so Sunwoo has no choice but to believe it. Sunwoo snaps, demanding to know how they could have allowed his father to be murdered if they knew it was going to happen. But Jong responds nonchalantly, as if his father's death was just a natural event that couldn't be avoided. This only angers Sunwoo more. In an outburst, he grabs Jong by the collar, demanding how he could have just sat back and let his father die when he knew it was coming. Nuna quickly intervenes, telling him to calm down. She gently points out that Jong lost his own daughter the same way. Jong further explains that while the prophecy clearly stated that Mr. Cheon Woo-hwan, aka our boy's father, would be murdered and his death would be disguised as a suicide, it never specified when, where, or how it would happen. He draws a parallel to the recent event where the serial killer, Choi Soon-chul, was also murdered at the police station, with his death being covered up as a suicide. Despite their efforts, no one was able to prevent it. even with their power. Zhang continues to explain that the Great Prophecy's directives are like that. Once something happens, it tells them who to speak to and how to act afterward. He admits that before Mr. Qian Wuwan's death, he couldn't reveal anything to Sunwoo because there was nothing to say. But Sunwoo demands to know why Zhang is doing all of this. Zhang answers that he's trying to prevent more victims like them from appearing and to completely uproot the mysterious faction they're fighting against. This is the core belief he follows, as written in the prophecy. Sunwoo, however, makes it clear that he doesn't care about any of that. Zhang says that he already knew Sunwoo would feel that way. He explains that the prophecy only foretells that Sunwoo will gain the power to defeat the faction, but it never specifies that Sunwoo will work with him and Nuna to do it. This leaves room for Sunwoo to potentially side with the faction instead. Zhang is confident that with Sunwoo's power, 1,000,000,000,000 would be pocket change for him. And even if Sunwoo chooses to chase after money and power with the faction, Zhang says he won't have any hard feelings. Ultimately, it's all up to Sunwoo. The choice is his to make. Sunwoo finally lets go of Zhang's collar and makes it clear that he doesn't care about causes, prophecies, or any grand plans. He admits he still doesn't fully understand why he's expected to follow his mother's prophecy, but one thing is certain, he's going to find the bastard who killed his father and make them pay. That's the only thing he wants. With that, Sunwoo begins to walk away. Nuna tries to scold Zhang for his cold and unyielding words, but Zhang stands firm. He reminds her that no matter what Sunwoo chooses, they don't have the right or strength to stop him. He warns her that even Police Commissioner Kang Jungeop, who was on their side, lost his position after going up against the faction. Soon, someone loyal to the faction will likely take over as the new police commissioner. Just as Nuna is about to respond, Sunwoo then speaks and makes something crystal clear. From now on, they better watch what they say around him. He reveals that there's someone with abilities far beyond his own, someone he calls Master. This person can see through anything Sunwoo can predict, and might even be watching all of them at this very moment. Zhang calmly explains why they've chosen this particular place to have such conversations. It's one of the few locations where the ability users from the faction can't see or interfere. According to the prophecy, there are several such safe zones listed, and they always ensure to discuss critical matters in these places. Nuna assures Sunwoo that she'll share more about these locations with him later. Zhang and Nuna assure Sunwoo that they will support him, no matter what, as long as he doesn't commit murder himself. They promise that no matter what crimes he might get involved in, they'll cover for him in the future. However, Sunwoo makes it crystal clear, his only goal is to avenge his father by killing the murderer. Zhang reminds Sunwoo that he doesn't need to get his own hands dirty. There's always a way to kill someone without taking the blame yourself, so he is hoping Sunwoo will make a wiser choice when the time comes. With the conversation nearing its end, Zhang decides to call it a day, and the group begins to leave the place one by one. Before departing, Nuna requests him not to hate Jiang for his cold words. She explains that Zhang puts his life on the line every time he acts, and that his seemingly cold demeanor hides how much he's truly sacrificed. She further adds that if she had known about the prophecy earlier, she would have done anything to prevent his father's death. She pleads with Sunwoo not to go down the wrong path and become a killer driven only by revenge. Sunwoo understands what she's trying to say, but he can't accept it. His father was murdered, and the thought fills him with unbearable grief. Tears stream down his face as he struggles with his emotions. Instead of leaving Sunwoo alone, Nuna steps closer and wraps him in a comforting hug, offering solace in his darkest moment. Right at that instant, holograms of his parents appear before him. They congratulate him for his growth. They explain that from now on, even in non-crisis situations, he can use all the skills of Preview Hyperlink. Additionally, he gains access to his new ability, which is called Another Preview, which allows him to see important moments in other people's lives. They inform him that he can now use these abilities without needing his device. His power to foresee others' futures has expanded, and the next person whose future he can glimpse is Byun In-soo. The following day, at an abandoned location, Byun In-soo is seen stashing large sums of cash. He speaks on call, instructing his partner that the money needs to be sent to Mokpo Construction tomorrow, and that the arrangements must be made. Once the call ends, In-soo's phone rings again. This time, it's Sunwoo on the other line. In-soo is shocked, not understanding how Sunwoo managed to get his number. Our boy just responds calmly, saying finding his phone number was easy, and that he knows exactly how In-soo's future will unfold. He then gives In-soo the coordinates for their meeting spot, instructing him to show up in 1 hour. Later that day, Byun In-soo arrives at the location as instructed, finding himself in front of an abandoned elementary school. As he enters, he mutters his discontent, questioning why Sunwoo would choose such a place to discuss something so secretive. The sign at the gate clearly states the school had been shut down for years, making it an odd choice. But our boy then asks this hypocrite why he has brought so many people with him, even though it was supposed to be a private chat. Since the cat is out of the bag, Insu tells his goons to come out, and a bunch of thugs walks into the room from both doors. He orders his lackeys to charge, and these brain-dead TikTok watchers just march towards Sunwoo, while Insu himself stands outside to have a cigarette in order to blow off some steam. Meanwhile, as the thugs get close to Sunwoo, he uses his ability, Eyes of Self-Awareness, and begins beating the hell out of them, dropping them one by one. Outside, Insu rummages through his pockets to find his lighter, but soon one thug comes crashing out of the room, which was enough to leave his next breath stuck in his throat. Sunwoo outsteps from the room like a badass gigachad. He is looking so badass to the point that the dangling cigarette falls out of Insu's mouth when he watches Sunwoo beat the crap out of the 20 men he brought along. One of the thugs comes out with a dagger in hand, promising Insu that he'll take care of Sunwoo. But Insu gives him a whack on the back for the humiliation they have already caused him, so he orders them all to get out of there. The thugs comply, running off like scared dogs. It seems like Insu is finally ready to listen to what Sunwoo has to say. A few minutes later, Insu starts the conversation by acknowledging that he already knows Sunwoo has the ability to see other people's futures, but he's not sure why they're here for a chat. Sunwoo bluntly responds that all he wants is to find his father's killer and kill him. Insu shrugs and says he's not the right person to ask about that because he doesn't know anything. Sunwoo had figured as much since Insu is just an underling, but he's sure that his boss, Lee Mokpyo of Mokpyo Constructions, would know. Insu snickers, because he finds it funny how this brat is casually calling out the chairman's name like they're childhood buddies. Sunwoo warns him to ditch that guy before he gets screwed. He even knows that Insu's main business involves laundering dirty money and running an illegal gambling site. The gangster admits, but also claims that he does more than just that, but he's willing to listen to what Sunwoo has to say. Before saying anything, Sunwoo reveals that by tomorrow, Insu will show up with 100 billion won and hand it over to Chairman Lee Mokpyo. Our boy also knows exactly what's going to happen to Insu afterward, since he has vaguely seen his distant future. In a month, Insu will be in prison, and after that, he won't be in this world anymore, because he's going to die. Insu is shocked for a moment and wonders aloud why the organization might want to ditch him. Sunwoo asks if he wants to live. Of course this bastard wants to live, so he reluctantly agrees to help. In exchange, Sunwoo promises to help him escape his fate and avoid his death. Insu then asks Sunwoo if he knows what force majeure means, to which Sunwoo responds with a simple no. Hearing this, Insu bursts out, shouting that it means he can't do anything about anything. If the organization is going to abandon him, then that's just how it's going to be. He adds that just the fact he's talking to Sunwoo about the organization is a serious crime that could make him a target for the executors. Sunwoo perks up at the mention of the executor, but Insu quickly covers his mouth, realizing his slip-up, and shuts his mouth tight. Since they're not getting anywhere, Sunwoo reminds him that he came here to offer a simple solution to a problem. But since Insu believes death is unavoidable and fate can't be changed, Sunwoo tells him he's free to die. With that, my guy starts walking away, promising that he won't interfere anymore. However, before leaving, he also tells Insu that if he wants to fight back, to challenge his fate and raise his chances of survival, even if it's just a little, then he can choose to side with him. The next day we see Chairman Lee Mokpyo is on the phone with someone. He tells the caller that since the seat of police commissioner is empty, they should quickly push someone into that position without wasting time. That's when the caller mentions some troubling news, saying that the company might be in trouble. But Mokpyo quickly reassures the caller that the money is flowing smoothly, so there shouldn't be any issues. He mentions that the company is doing solid, and they should just trust it. With that, he ends the call. Right at that moment, his assistant informs him that President Byun Insu is here. Once Insu enters, he casually comments that this restaurant is overpriced, and the food is bland. He's not sure why Mokpyo always picks this place for their conversations. Chairman Mokpyo then throws a sassy jab at him, asking why he wears such shabby clothes, even though he earns tens of billions a month. Insu responds that real rich people don't flaunt their wealth. Besides, if he started spending all his money on clothes, he's not sure how he'd be able to provide the necessary funds to the chairman. Speaking of money, Mokpyo asks when the funds will be ready. Insu replies that the laundering is done and it's in the drawer. By today, there should be around 100 billion. Right at that moment, they hear the guard outside telling some brat to go away. But Insu calmly states that he's a guest, so let him in. The chairman curiously asks who it is, but it looks like he'll find out soon enough. As soon as Sunwoo enters, he greets the chairman and reminds him that the last time they met was at Sion's house. From the look on Mokpyo's face, it's clear that he's not thrilled to see Sunwoo here, but Sunwoo is more than happy to take things a step up and initiate the conversation further.